Today, we got a lot to cover because the news is actually breaking as we speak. It's getting harder and harder to keep up, but do not worry. I am here to prepare you for a world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies as we transition week to week. We're going to be covering this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. And the main theme and topic of each of those three sections is going to be the 2025 New World Order meeting. I want to give you the implications of the meeting on both Bitcoin macro and geopolitics so that you can stay one step ahead and make sure that you are not falling for the media that is trying to direct you. At BitcoinHardTalk, we follow the money. In fact, we follow the hardest form of money, Bitcoin, and this is hard talk about hard money. And so if we have not met already, welcome to the show. My name is Simon Dixon. I have spent the last 2 decades dedicating my life to the world of Bitcoin investing and money. And I'm going to break it down for you so that you can understand how to transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDC. So without further ado, let's go for what we're going to cover tonight, and then we'll go straight into the Bitcoin section. So as I said, the main theme, welcome everybody, is the 2025 New World Order meeting. I believe that the meeting that is about to happen in Saudi Arabia is way more significant than most people are understanding. And there is a reason why Europe is not at the table. There is a reason why China's not at the table. There is a reason why India's not at the table. And there is a reason why Zelensky from Ukraine is not at the table. We'll make sure you understand that. But we've got to follow the money, not the propaganda, in order to get on the right track. So we're going to go through all of that. In the Bitcoin section, although we just had 2 breaking news as we speak, the main thing that I was going to be covering is the rug pull from Javier Milei, the president of Argentina. I'll make sure you understand that and the implications and how it connects to some of the other meme coin scams that have happened. There was a massive rug pull this week. At the same time, we had news from Coinbase, and the SEC has dropped the case, and that relates to Operation Choke Point 2. Relates to the macro section, which also relates to the geopolitical section. We'll make sure that we connect the dots and you understand it. So we'll cover that in the Bitcoin section. In the macro section, I'm going to be going through the 2025 New World Order and its implications on the meeting that's coming up, and so that you can understand what it means for inflation, what it means for this world of artificial intelligence, and what it means for gas, oil, and other rare earth minerals that make up the chips behind semiconductors, so that you can fit it all together and you don't need to be confused by the rubbish that they'll be telling you on the media. And in the third section, in geopolitics, we are getting closer and closer and closer to what I think is the end of the Ukraine, Russia, and the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I'm going to be going through what I think it looks like and what the pitfalls are, so that we don't move away from a world of peace, because there are forces out there that would love war. So I want you to see even the false flag operations that happened today in order to fool people into escalating war rather than move into a world of peace. So with that intro, let's go straight into section 1, this week in Bitcoin. So as I hinted at in the intro, Coinbase made an announcement. Full disclosure, I was a very early investor in Coinbase before it went public. The private equity through Bank to the Future, as many other investors were as well, that went through the platform. But Coinbase came out and said that the SEC has dropped the case and likely it will be confirmed next week. Now, we know that this was all part of the Operation Choke Point 2.0, and we know where it came from. And it is very important that we audit the Fed. And we even saw in the Senate hearing with Jerome Powell, him switching his narrative away from banks should be able to work with crypto after very, very aggressively saying that you don't even want to look at this area, to also semi-admitting that there was a coordinated attack on our industry through Operation Choke Point 2.0, which we know led to the loss of billions of dollars through implants and unnatural strategies that tied into both the crypto side, the macro side, and the geopolitical side as well. Anyway, it came from the Fed at the top. We haven't got the confirmation yet, but audit the Fed and we shall find out. And it came down through the banking lobby, through the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, that are shills that are paid for her political campaigning by the banking lobby in order to do the bidding, not of America, but for the banks, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And then it came down through the SEC and Gary Gensler, who is now fired, that is meant to be protecting consumers, but is actually protecting lobby interest from those that are actually, at best, bribing, blackmailing, paying, or they are just bad agents in the first place. When you follow the money, you get the truth, and you don't need to follow for anything. Anyway, there was an attempted controlled demolition of our industry in 2022. As our industry was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we had these scams like Celsius and FTX that had implants like Mijinski and SBF that were then controlled, demolished, which led to the loss of billions of dollars of creditors or, innocent victims' money. And that was weaponized and used. And you can go back through the narrative of the Fed when they said inflation is transitory by pushing down rates. And then suddenly hiking rates, which led to the destruction of the bond market, or a well-functioning bond market. And that led to rates that caused issues in the banks. The banks that were needed to be a part, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, were given FDIC loans, and the ones they wanted to take out, like Signature, Silicon Valley Bank, and Silvergate, that was serving our industry, they were goodbye FDIC takeover, give us all your money. Gangster, Gestapo took over the banks and said, you are now mine, controlled demolition. And if you don't play ball, we'll make you JP Morgan. And JP Morgan is the shareholder of the Federal Reserve and one of the architects of the Federal Reserve system that is killing middle-class America through inflation and redistributing all of your taxpayer and your money that is being printed to fund wars and the proof of weapons network to being pushing up the share price of those that benefit at the expense of the everyday American, until eventually the US dollar proof of weapons network no longer works, which causes civil unrest. And we are seeing record levels of suicides right now, record levels of mental illnesses, record levels of everything that's destructive in society, because that is how a debt-based fiat currency Ponzi scheme works. So you need to resist. Life is about making sure that you can beat the proof of weapons network if you are to survive. And you do that by peaceful resistance that Satoshi Nakamoto gave to us in 2008. They could not beat us, so they tried to take us down. And they used the SEC, the Federal Reserve, and the weapons of the apparatus, even to go as far as the Biden administration trying to go to Saudi Arabia to negotiate lower oil prices, and ended up with higher oil prices so that Russia and America could wipe out Europe and take out the banks that they needed to on the way. We'll be going more and more through that as we go through the flow of money and everything that lead to this. And I'm not saying everything's planned. Things go wrong, but you can see the forces that are at work, and it's dead simple to see through the propaganda once you follow the money and understand the flows. Well, they wanted to hand over our industry to BlackRock and the globalist large financial institutions, which are the controllers of global finance, not the ones that have an America First agenda, the ones that have a global agenda. They don't mind working with China. They don't mind working with Saudi Arabia. They don't mind working with Russia. They don't mind working with Europe, South America, Central America, Africa, but they're certainly not America First. And yet they control America because they control the lobby, and you can buy the government using campaign financing across America. Well, anyway, they wanted to hand over the industry to those that control the global financial system. And suddenly the SEC says, Bitcoin ETF approved, BlackRock. And no, banks can't use this, but the ones that are the shareholders in the Federal Reserve that can custody through Bank of New York Mellon, you're approved to do the custody. And Coinbase We are going to take you down. SEC is going to sue you and make sure you are down. They countersued, they lost, and full credit where credit is due. Throughout this whole show, I've always talked about how the Trump administration was the vote, because fix the money, fix the world, despite the fact he's definitely not a neocon, but he has to play the Zionist game, which we'll cover in the geopolitical section, which is what is standing in the way of America having the monetary reform that it needs in order to use stablecoin regulations and Bitcoin strategic reserves to take on the Fed after the audit. And it's exposed what is happening with the gold in America in the Fort Knox audit. All to come. We will make sure we cover it every single week. But Coinbase fought back. BlackRock got what they wanted, but Coinbase essentially, through the change in administration, through the lobbying efforts of the crypto lobby, and through the fact that they could not beat us, so they joined us. And so they ended up figuring out how to own as much Bitcoin as possible and setting up the tools that they need in order to remove the apparatus of the traditional financial banking and hand it all over to the technocrats as well. But fortunately, Satoshi Nakamoto saw this one coming, and it was designed through proof of work, whereby whoever owns it cannot control it. And even if you get control of mining, you still got node operators, and you have this beautiful, elegant design that has now become geopolitically neutral, apolitical money that can see through any type of country agenda, because if you can't beat them, you have to join them. And that is not just for America. That is the same for every country in the world. It didn't work. We won. And as long as you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, then you can beat the system, and a peaceful resistance against the shenanigans of crony capitalism and those that control the global finance proof of weapons network that need more and more war in order to sell their fiat currency and make sure it comes back into the military contractors that back up the violent fiat currency proof of weapons network, as was designed by the Bank of England, handed over to the Federal Reserve, and through the Bank for International Settlements, perpetuated across 157 countries, while the IMF and the economic hitmen overthrew country and country and got them into debt slavery in order to ensure that they were there to prop up the dollar and create the environment that we are in today, that we are retreating from. More on that in the macro section. But we need to audit the SEC. We need to show we've got the model that was already done through USAID. And then at the right time, get your stablecoin regulations, get your Bitcoin strategic reserves, decide with your market structuring, which regulator, whether these are securities or not, how you're going to engage. And then at the right time, you can do a controlled demolition on the Federal Reserve, should you choose, if they use such tactics again, which they will. And that is why you got to get the timing right. The model has been set. We saw what happened with USAID. We saw what happened with the National Endowment of Democracy. You flood the market just like WikiLeaks used to. You tell the truth, and then you decide strategically at the right moment that you do a controlled demolition of the apparatus of the proof of weapons network, which was exposing, as was done with USAID, exposing the colored revolutions, the human trafficking operations that taxpayers are paying for, the drug cartels, all of the things that we know Elizabeth Warren was saying is Bitcoin, when we know that it's the banking cartels that actually allow that, and it's the fiat currency proof of weapons network. And in fact, it is systemically designed in order to prop up the crimes against humanity of the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme, where there is more interest every time a deposit is created when a bank issues a loan. The controllers of the digital currency called the pound, the euro, the dollar, and everything else. Anyway, remember the model. We learned it from USAID. Controlled demolition through radical transparency, and then you can have retreat, and that's exactly what I think we are doing. But the lesson is you should not be holding your Bitcoin and Bitcoin ETFs unless there is a very strong reason, and it's part of a hedging strategy. The reason for that is because we saw today, live as we speak, the largest custodial exchange hack that we have ever seen in the history of our industry. Today, $1.4 billion worth of ETH and staked ETH was hacked from the Bybit exchange. Why? Bybit has to hold large deposits in order to allow you to leverage, because they allow you to short Bitcoin, engage in financial speculation, do the 100x leverage, all of the old tricks of the fiat currency proof of weapons network that are designed to part you from your Bitcoin. And although this is ETH, and we'll go, we'll dig deeper into that, but have this as your lesson. Self-custody is the way. And if you are going to custody, you don't do it with an exchange. You do it with a custodian that's subject to audit and is not using vast amounts of that in order to create leverage structured products and futures and everything, and lending that Bitcoin and doing all the shenanigans that can lead to these types of scenarios as well. Anyway, the funds had begun today out of Bybit, $1.4 billion. The addresses are all being tracked, and you can't even do anything with that. They're selling it. They're putting it through Tornado Cash. They're obfuscating the addresses right now. So far, they have sold $200 million worth of staked ETH, and I'm really surprised the price has actually sustained itself. It shows you the sheer level of liquidity. Back in the day, this would have been like an 80% correction in Bitcoin, even though it had nothing to do with Bitcoin. But those were the beautiful days when you could buy Bitcoin on the cheap because something like this would happen, but the liquidity is all being sucked up. Expect some kind of volatility, but this might create the buying opportunity because we had some good news with the SEC retreating, and then immediately we get these controlled demolition of exchanges. The reason they are doing controlled demolition of exchanges is because they want to fool you into selling your Bitcoin so that those on the other side of the hack can accumulate it, as the proof of weapons network is designed to trick you into fooling you into thinking your Bitcoin is worth selling. Anyway, this is the biggest hack we've ever seen in the industry, and it's also a testament to how far we've come. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank proof of weapons network that gives its private bank shareholders the ability to create the euro every time they issue a loan is looking at how it can hold on, because traditionally the European Central Bank, a part of the apparatus, has been a Fed-first central bank. It has killed Europe. It has driven Europe into decline. We'll cover more of that in the macro section. But as the European Central Bank is destroying Europe by making it go into a Fed-first policy, which is propping up the euro dollar so that countries don't have Bitcoin strategic reserves, and they are bowing down to the almighty European Central Bank, which is driving bad policy and making sure that it props up the dollar for the Fed, a Fed-first institution. The Europeans are starting to realize there is nothing working here. And of course, the European Central Bank is set up for a controlled demolition, because all it is needing to do is hold on and extract as much out of the European people that are being tricked through the euro in order to take those funds from you. Now, what are they going to do to bail out the system? Well, of course, if it's being prepped for a controlled demolition, they're getting ready for their central bank digital currency. So they made an announcement today. They are going to be launching their blockchain-based payment system, which is a slow creep towards their central bank digital currency vision, which is the vision of all of these central banks in the end, which is to fully take away, so that when you have a controlled demolition of the shareholders and the banks, you can either transition to a stablecoin based system with the technocratic artificial intelligence running it, or you can continue, if the country falls for it, to have a central bank digital currency. And of course, they will be hedging both sides of that, and you protect yourself through peaceful proof of work, Bitcoin, and you don't fall for the shenanigans of the fiat currency proof of weapons network. Anyway, we're meant to be progressing towards Bitcoin, but the installed leadership across Europe is playing full into the warmongering mission that was set up by the CIA when it drove America basically wage war on Europe through this proxy war that they call a Ukraine-Russian war, that was designed in order to completely control, demolish the European people, and it worked like a treat. America won, but there is the New World Order meeting being set up that we can go through and understand how to get ahead of this so that you don't get fooled by it. Now, remember, we could have those countries deciding to fight against the European Central Bank by building their own Bitcoin strategic reserves, but they have to be honest, just like we're experiencing in America when the controlled demolition was happening, when there is a retreat to a regional superpower rather than a global superpower, when the apparatus is being set up to hedge against the exposure of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, fiat currency, proof of weapons network. When that is being set up, you need to set up the alternative and be ready for it. That is the combination of Bitcoin strategic reserves, and we are moving more and more into the innovation on Lightning Network, which is allowing for stable coins to exist on Bitcoin Lightning as well. So we are transferring over to a potential environment of peace if the Bitcoin strategic reserves are built up for countries and they are able to transition peacefully. If they double down on their central bank, then they will be going through the path of violence, which will lead to more war, death, and destruction. Monetary reform is needed. It can be done evolutionary or it can be done revolutionary. The reason America retreated is because we were about to enter into World War III, and they knew that China was going to sit on the side and everyone else was going to blow each other up. The economies of the world were going to be destroyed, and China would have won just like America won during World War I and World War II, because they sat on the side while everyone else was blowing each other up. So now we need to make sure that we are focusing on the Bitcoin side on getting Lightning Network adoption. We've been waiting a long time. It is slowly growing. But now that we are having beta tests of USDT, Tether, stablecoins, and it doesn't have to be Tether, it could be someone else, it could be decentralized, it could be all sorts of things. But the beta test of having the ability to send stablecoins on the Lightning Network where people can lock up their Bitcoin in a decentralized way, this is a massive progress, and we must, and I will, be investing more into making sure that this area progresses at a faster pace. To give you context, if you look at stable coins last year in 2024, just for example, take the volume of stable coins, which you know, USDT and the other ones, in December and January alone, they did $1.4 trillion in volume. If you wanted to annualize that across the entire year, that is $8.4 trillion in transactions. Now, what is the issue with that? Scalability has always been why we needed to create the layer one chain, which is Bitcoin. We needed to get that right. We needed to make sure that the node operators could run nodes so that they can back up cheap copies of the entire blockchain, so that if there is excess control with the miners, then there is that user-activated soft fork resistance against the miners, as we saw during the block war debate when the miners tried to collude to increase the block size. We had that user-activated soft fork, and we transitioned and kept the chain the way it should be by optimizing decentralization rather than going for the easy option of cheaper fees but more centralization. So the new stablecoin regulation, stablecoin volume has basically been, kind of hindered due to and it's always gone to other chains other than Bitcoin because they have lower fees. So you can come and create a cheaper, faster, better, but less decentralized network without the massive expense of the security of proof of work. And you can come along and say, well, you can send your stable coins cheaper because they're centralized anyway. And that is what's happened. So a lot of it moved across to Ethereum, and then it moved across to other chains because it was optimizing for cheap transaction fees. That advantage disappears. And we have privacy enhancing when we open channels on the Lightning Network through layer 2. I don't want to get too geeky into the technicals. If you're interested in this, please do start investigating it. But if you have stable coins on top of Lightning, you get the privacy enhancements, And you get this you don't need to move to these more centralized chains to get cheaper fees, because this was designed to open channels and have significantly cheaper. This could be the killer app for layer 2 Lightning adoption on Bitcoin, and could lay the foundation for countries that want to build a Bitcoin standard and have their own fiat currencies built on top by opening Lightning channels. The apparatus is being set up for the countries that want to do this. And the opportunity for the countries that front run and build their Bitcoin strategic reserves. El Salvador is the one that's doing it in the most responsible way. The Kingdom of Bhutan, did it took on a lot more. And we are seeing other regions. We're seeing states across America. America has to get this through their legal system. They need stablecoin regulations. They need market, who's regulating who. And they then need their Bitcoin strategic reserves. It is a race, and there will be other countries doing this as well. It is the perfect setup for the way that the BRICS currency was designed as well. And so we need to make sure that we can handle all of this, and we still have a lot more to build, which is why none of this is factored into the current price already. So imagine if Bitcoin gets its share of the stablecoin volume. So let's just do some estimates. Bitcoin currently has 60% of the network. That, Bitcoin dominance is the statistic. 40% of the network is the rest of the crypto industry. 60% is approximately Bitcoin. That fluctuates. But if Bitcoin were able to get its 60% share of the stable coins, because it had the private channels, it was able to get the network effect. It also has the cheaper fees as well through Lightning Network. You could see an extra $5.1 trillion going through the Bitcoin Lightning Network. And that is the type of adoption that is needed in order to bootstrap this and make it ready for a country that wants to transition to a Bitcoin standard. We have, Suriname in South America. Maya, who I interviewed on BitcoinHardTalk, she's looking to become the next Bitcoin president that actually builds the whole system on open source using this technology. We could have that beta test, which could be used. And so Bitcoin on-chain settlements in 2024 was approximately $19 trillion. So at a $5.1 trillion increase, if you could get stable coins on top of Lightning, on top of Bitcoin, this could be a 27% jump in transactions settled. And you get the benefits of Lightning privacy on top of Bitcoin. And you get the transaction volume, to be able to handle some of these, compete with these payment networks. And then we can have the model that Bitcoin can promise to achieve as we progress through this as well. So anyway, all in all, if you do the maths, we'd end up with approximately 1,197% increase in adoption of transactions on the Lightning Network, which means that those that wanted to open their channels that can be provided through rewards for providing liquidity can lock up their Bitcoin in the network and end up receiving rewards for providing liquidity to this new financial system that can emerge. Anyway, I've instructed the Bank to the Future team to start looking into investments we can make and how we can support liquidity into such things as well. So if you are a member of Bank to the Future, then look out for announcements into the future, because we want to make sure that we can support that increase in liquidity and also benefit from stable coins on top of the Bitcoin Lightning Network, and see what the yield opportunities are there as well for locking up Bitcoin in a decentralized way as well. Anyway, it's the tools that countries need to fully adopt Bitcoin with stables and private transactions. And the countries that get this right will be the ones that have the potential to be the freedom-orientated currencies that want to attract the most amount of volume, the most amount of liquidity, and it will be an opportunity for countries to use Bitcoin as this bottom-up movement in order to support the growth and fight back against the occupation of their central banks if they are being overthrown through current revolutions and everything that the proof of weapons network in the US dollar is exposing to us all at the moment as we move to this transparency as well. This will be great for countries that were victimized most by the fiat currency proof of weapon network. Imagine Syria rebuilding on top of a Bitcoin standard. Imagine Libya doing the same, the one that was destroyed by covert operations in America. Syria destroyed by covert operations from the Federal Reserve proof of weapons network. Imagine if that was done in Sudan, in Palestine, even in Ukraine, El Salvador, Zimbabwe, Argentina, the victims of the International Monetary Fund, the financial gangsters, the economic hitmen that decided to wipe out everybody's savings in order to prop up the dollar-based demand system so they could never use their resources. If we are moving towards a retreat of the economic hitmen of the IMF, in dismantling the petrodollar and the eurodollar, which is what I'm speculating in the macro section is happening right now, all those countries, if it has the right leadership, can rebuild based upon a Bitcoin standard. And it can be done bottom up, and it can be done evolutionary rather than violent revolutions as well. Speaking of Argentina, Milei. You got scammed. And you scammed other people. What can I say? You're going to have legal issues for a long time. What a disaster. So Milei could have, if he chose, he could have been right at the root of this bottom-up revolution that would have been so good for all the Argentinians, that have been so destroyed by the International Monetary Fund and the economic hitmen and the financial weapons of mass destruction and the wokest movement towards welfare and sociology and socialism that was inflicted upon them in order to get them into debt perpetuity, to steal their resources, to take all of their oil resources and their gold. And Milei could have been the one that could have delivered that. He could have triggered international adoption of Bitcoin by following the Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy, by listening to El Salvador and Bukele that led the what's possible here. This could have created a massive position of influence, a massive industry, a massive bottom-up movement, an era that breaks 1,000 years of, oppression through fiat currency proof of weapons network, even ushered in sound money for the next 1,000 years. And Argentina could have been, and still can be if they choose, at the center of that. Instead, he sat down with the wrong person that he met at a shitcoin casino conference and decided in 60 minutes to pull off a shitcoin, meme coin rug pull that he got fooled into because Trump gave the green light of launching his own meme coin, and he thought that he could replicate the same thing. And instead, now the reputation is tarnished, the peso crashed, the Argentinian stock market crashed, all because this shows why centralization is a problem. This is why we Bitcoin. This is why we have the proof of work network, because we don't need to trust these leaders. It doesn't matter who Satoshi is. Satoshi handed over the project in 2010. None of it matters. And the idiot Peter Schiff that I was debating, I'll upload that to YouTube. Remember to get that uploaded to YouTube. Was saying, but who is Satoshi? We need to know who Satoshi is. He wants a CEO that can be assassinated or can engage in the shitcoin casino and launch meme coins. Satoshi gave us a gift by walking away and leaving the project decentralized as it is. Anyway, what did Milei do? He handed over all of his, or a big chunk of Argentina's gold and Co. in London at the same time when the Bank of England is not even able to fulfill demand for gold, as we are having a repatriation of gold, while the Fort Knox is being audited because you can't trust custodians, and the Bank of England is probably next on the chopper if Elon Musk can successfully pull off a regime change in the UK to get all of the data from the UK government to hand it over to the artificial intelligence that is needed to power his stablecoin using the social credit score that will be built upon X. If he successfully does that, then Milei handed over a chunk of the gold over to the UK. It's not easy. It's not even easy to repatriate that. The Bank of England's not even delivering at the moment. And he hands it over to Rothschild in London. And at the same time, he rugged his own people with a meme coin, all in the name of supporting Argentina. So if you didn't see the story, there was massive lawsuits that are now being used and weaponized through lawfare, through political, enemies, as well as the genuine victims that bought this shitcoin. And obviously he came out and said, if you play in the shitcoin casino, you deserve everything you got, which is true. Hopefully you'll be learning your lesson and you not be, gambling in this industry and having no Bitcoin at the end of it. But through Trump's legacy of launching meme coins and sucking out all the volume that we covered in previous, a grifter was able to sit down with President Milei, buy through the crypto lobby a meeting, and make him think that this is a good idea. So now Milei has joined in the club with his new shitcoin. I don't even want to mention it, but I got to mention it. Please do not engage in these things. Libra, which is interesting. The same name as the one that was launched by Facebook. Which ended up with the Proof of Weapons Network having a hissy fit to stop Libra or Facebook launching their stablecoin as well. Anyway, he marketed his meme coin and he said on his X account that this is to support Argentina. He received millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars from those that were fans worldwide. I'm not sure how many were Argentinians that were on the wrong side of the Proof of Weapons Network thinking this is a good investment versus the majority that were probably speculating. And the market cap launched immediately over $4 billion, manipulated by the same people that created the token, that was holding all the funds, and now has all the funds that this sniper sniped out and dumped on everybody in order to crash the coin by 97% immediately or shortly after Milei tweeted and got as many people into this pump and dump scam as possible. Of course, the first thing he did was delete his tweet. And now he comes out and expects everybody to just move on and pretend that it never happened immediately afterwards. Then what happened? He put out another tweet and came back for another pump and dump, which led to the same snipers or different snipers rugging more money out of the victims as well, or the gamblers, whatever you want to call them, and did a second snipe. And shortly afterwards, after the tweets were deleted and the second snipe was done, a gentleman, or let's call a sniper, called Hayden Davis, that managed to engineer this whole thing in the first place, came out and put in his video saying that he has over $100 million that he sniped and does not know what to do because he's sat there with this money, and Milei and the team are pretending that they're nothing to do with it, and then had to later come out and admit it. And did basically what Sam Bankman-Fried, if you remember, when we were on X Spaces and SBF came up and said, I don't know what happened to all the money. I was, I don't know what happened. And we started asking him questions about how the engine works and the market making and the connections between Alameda and FTX. And then he ended up confessing to the worst types of things that you could do on video through CoffeeZilla's YouTube channel as well. So literally, this guy is in serious trouble as well. Hayden basically was the sniper and then admitted to doing the exact same on the First Lady, President Trump's wife's coin, Melania, which rugged and did a snipe and got out and did an 89% correction. And he was behind that. So now he connected it to everything that happened with the president of the United States, and then even reveals that insiders in the Trump token got into the meme coin at a pre-launch dinner at a $500 million market cap that went up to approximately an $80 billion market cap, while there was sniping all the way up. That was happening at a private meeting at a crypto board dinner that was being promoted, right before President Trump came in. I think it was the 20th of January, was it? Wow, things have moved so fast. Anyway, right. So full disclosure, having went through the drama of this, I don't think Milei made any money out of it personally. We can never tell. You don't know what's really happening behind the scenes. But immediately Milei come out after confessing, saying, sorry, he launched an investigation into Libra. And that's when the hostage videos came out where Hayden was saying, I don't know what to do. I need Milei to reply and the team to reply. That immediately followed by Argentina lawyers filing fraud claims and criminal claims against Milei for promoting a crypto rug pull. And now anyone that is a victim of that is going to be caught in a horrific process because they want to refund the money. But you can't refund the money without going through, what we went through, the type of process that happened with Celsius and happened with FTX, where you have to go into a bankruptcy in order to protect yourself from the lawsuits. The lawyers start spending all the money, and then you go in a process of those that were refunded, that were unfairly, the crypto influencers that were refunded, they have to have clawbacks, and then you dollarize the claim, and then you distribute it fairly. And then you've got cross-jurisdictional arbitration, political campaign financing, corruptions, assassinations, everything that could be involved, political interference, a lesson to anybody. And, so many times, do not be fooled into these meme coins. Stay away from it. It is not worth your entire reputation in order to scam some money just because you missed Bitcoin. Do it the honest way, because Bitcoin is the opportunity that everyone can participate in. And immediately this led to a bit of a correction in the peso, a crash of the Argentinian stock market. It's time to redeem yourself, Milei. You are stuck in this mess. You got fooled by this grifter, but bring the gold home, demonstrate, expose the Bank of England, expose Rothschild, expose the proof of weapons network, stop dollarizing and doing the bidding of the Federal Reserve, adopt Bitcoin as a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the Argentinian people, make Bitcoin legal tender, and eventually you can start supporting Lightning Network for your current country to structure some kind of stable coin payment system built upon Lightning Network. And you can redeem yourself and be a part of this historical moment of fighting back against the International Monetary Fund. Bukele did it. He's continuing to do it, but he didn't do it fast enough. So he didn't end up with enough Bitcoin. He's only got his 6,000 or Bitcoin, which meant that the IMF could engage in political interference in order to set the terms. Now you can continue through that. Fortunately, some of that money that the IMF sent over to El Salvador ended up in an increased purchase of Bitcoin. But if Bukele had enough Bitcoin and did it faster, he would have been able to restructure, launch the Bitcoin bonds, and continue the good mission of telling the Bank of England, telling the International Monetary Fund, telling the Federal Reserve and the US Congress, F you, we're going to be a sovereign nation, and we're going to build our Bitcoin strategic reserves. Abu Dhabi came out and said and disclosed that their sovereign wealth fund has $436 million of Bitcoin ETF held in custody in America, when the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi, if it wanted, could learn from the El Salvador strategy. It's a start. It's okay. Now we know that the Bitcoin ETFs are applying for in-kind redemption so that you can go directly from Bitcoin to Bitcoin ETF and vice versa. And that can be done by some of these sovereign wealth funds as they progress to remain sovereign. You never know when the proof of weapons network is going to be negotiated against you. Now, fortunately, I do believe that Abu Dhabi has positioned itself on the right side of the New World Order that is going to be negotiated very shortly, that we'll cover in both the macro section. But anyway, Europe needs to catch up. Europe is on the complete wrong side of this. Australia came out and said we could use political campaign and we could do what Trump did. We could get the crypto vote. And there is enough of a community within Australia in order to swing the vote over to the opposing party by using crypto and having Trump or pro-crypto Bitcoin policies. So Australia, you make sure that your money goes with the, we can swing all these different votes and get the right type of leadership that's needed so that eventually we can transition and get rid of the neocon warlords that support the central banking proof of weapons network, an evolutionary transition rather than waiting for a war-led revolution. So the crypto lobby is building up in Australia. I think the crypto voting bloc is meant to be approximately 2 million people or 2 million users. So make sure that in your country, as we go that, remember Germany's next. And Germany is going vastly down authoritarianism as it turned off its nuclear, as it got destroyed by the American-led operation to blow up Nord Stream pipeline, to remove its manufacturing base, as it went further and further to the left and sacrificed its economy into recession by going through the Fed-first policy of the European Central Bank. Meanwhile, more and more traditional financial institutions are starting to protect themselves. $725 billion asset manager Bernstein says that the US government, rather than having to print dollars in order to purchase Bitcoin, can simply revalue its gold, sell some of its gold and its gold reserves to purchase Bitcoin. This can be done at the right strategic moment after auditing Fort Knox, determining that the Fed hasn't stolen all of America's gold and that it is there, and then structuring it after a Bitcoin strategic reserve, stablecoin regulations, and determining who the regulator is and getting away from FDIC and OCC, and hopefully putting in players that are actually America first as we move through this retreat in a de-dollarization world that we'll be going through in the macro section. At the same time, the New York Stock Exchange filed a proposed solution to allow for staking of Grayscale's Ethereum ETF. Remember the PSYOP. Those that control the stake in proof of stake have a voting in the governance of the network. So Grayscale will become a significant player in determining the future, which is why Ethereum is most likely to be used as a tokenized network for real world assets as this progresses. And those who the ETF providers, if they can get approval for staking, they can create the semi-control network that's needed as you have this two-tiered Ethereum system, DeFi in self-custody and ETFs in custody that control the stake. Bitcoin did not go for that design, even though BlackRock tried to do that when they had their ESG narrative and they supported Ethereum to try and pressure Bitcoin to transitioning proof of work to proof of stake. But because Bitcoin is not controlled by any lobbying group or any controller or any large pre-mined token holder, they could not control it. So they ended up having to just own some and settle for benefiting from it rather than controlling it. Anyway, remember, for those that want to maintain control of the stake, where it's legally held in your name in custody, rather than you having a share or paper version of ETH, at Bank to the Future, we allow people to do that. So you don't create a not tax advice, but you don't create a taxable event by exchanging one security for another security. You just simply rent a validator, and then you can take those weekly rewards from ETH staking as this network hedges. You can hedge against whatever's happening in Bitcoin in case all of the real world assets ends up on Ethereum. And you can even convert your stake into Bitcoin, or you could choose to do it in US dollars. And then you can invest that in shares of Bitcoin companies as you can go through all that, and as Bitcoin Lightning stable coins progress, we'll make sure to share those opportunities with our investors as we rebuild and everybody can join in this new financial system that is shaping up week by week that we'll be covering, and we always cover on Bitcoin Hard Talk as well. What else happened? Well, the Proof of Weapons Network, after their controlled demolition, they're all coming in. We had a message from the largest custodian in the world, State Street and Citibank, one of the largest shareholders in the Federal Reserve, that they're going to be launching their crypto custody service. And then obviously they'll do their Ethereum service. And then obviously they'll apply to be able to stake it so that they can tokenize their real world assets and have a say in the future of the governance of that network. At the same time, the remnants of the Operation Choke Point 2.0, like the controlled demolition from FTX, the victims of that, they started receiving some of their payments. And thankfully, one of the companies we invested in and funded in the seed round and other investors at Bank to the Future, Kraken, one of the largest exchanges that are looking to go public later this year so more people can participate. At Bank to the Future, you're able to buy private equity pre-IPO in Kraken as well. But they were distributing all the payments. Those payments came in, my understanding, because in the bankruptcy, just like we may see in the Milei case with this meme coin, whatever happens there, they tend to use the Proof of Weapons Network to dollarize your claim, to confuse you into thinking that you're whole, so that if the price of Bitcoin goes up, they can say you're whole in dollar terms, even though you got wrecked in Bitcoin terms. But they distributed in dollars, and now those dollars can be easily converted into Bitcoin through the Kraken exchange, producing more buy volume, which may be a reason why we have a $1.4 billion hack, and yet the price doesn't seem to be too affected. Let me just check out what's happening, because this is all happening in real time. Only 2% down on Ethereum after the worst hack, 1.4% down on Bitcoin. Absolutely remarkable, the amount of liquidity. That back in the day would have been wild. This is a reflection of where our market is and where we're headed as well. Right, a few more on the Bitcoin side before we start going into the macro side. Elon Musk Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, announced an audit of the SEC for fraud, for abuse, and for waste. And so this is the controlled demolition model. You put in the new leadership, you get rid of the old, you expose it, and then we can move forward, wipe the slate scene, set the new regulations, because America hopefully is getting ready to hedge itself from the Proof of Weapons Network as it starts to take away more of this war-led economy and retreat to America first, which is what we're witnessing right before our eyes. Now, there is obviously the technocracy side that I've covered as AI becomes the data play, but we are exchanging one incredibly horrible evil that is leading to death to a data-driven world. And quite frankly, we have to just prepare ourselves through the change and make sure that we have as much peaceful proof of work, Bitcoin in self-custody to resist everything that is happening. So let's call this Operation Choke Point 3.0. Let's choke the Fed. Let's choke the SEC. Let's expose it. Let's go to transparency. And let's expose the financial institutions so that more and more people can recognize that this was a controlled demolition psyop and learn the importance of self-custody so that you're not subjected to the whims of those that are controlling through global finance these forces. Is it time to reopen the FTX file as well? Remember, there was all the Democrat Party political bribery. Remember, SBF parents right now are trying to campaign to get a presidential pardon. Remember, the judge decided not to investigate all of the bribery that was happening through FTX and how funds were being flown into Ukraine. Now we know what we know about Ukraine in order to pay influencers in order to fool you into thinking that you're fighting for democracy, when really this was all about selling more weapons, violence, death, destruction, sacrificing Ukrainian people for a proxy war where US waged war on Europe in order to detract it from actually aligning with BRICS. We'll cover more on that. But remember, time to open up the FTX files, because the corrupt Biden administration that has been paid by the corruption of the military industrial complex swept aside those criminal investigations. Of course, they revealed the bribing that happened in China, but they didn't reveal the democratic stuff. So why don't we reopen that file for the FTX side as well? Let's open that again. Elon Musk also came out and said that US politicians that received any kickbacks from taxpayer funds that were sent to Ukraine, those need to be audited and those need to be exposed as well. Microsoft, in a very important announcement before we go into the macro section as well, there was announcements in terms of quantum chips. I think they called it Majorana 1. And so there is an important strand or subset of Bitcoin improvement proposals to make sure that we are ready for quantum resistant cryptography. I think this is going to become a more and more important thing. We've learned how these forks work within Bitcoin world. When it is needed, they get consensus. But this is also a systemic issue, not just to Bitcoin, but to everything. Because these SHA-256 cryptography, which is used in order to basically getting ahead of it, is that quantum resistant cryptography is something that needs to be prepared for, is Bitcoin transitions. That is not a reason not to buy Bitcoin, as some people will say, because the solutions already exist. We will do the fork at the right time, but the community needs to be more aggressive with those Bitcoin improvement proposals and buckle up. Welcome. If you weren't involved in the hard fork debate, you'll see how this works and how Bitcoin actually designed itself so that there is no political corruption, there is no centralized decision making, and the players are held into check with each other. But at some stage, as we go further and further down the quantum route, we're going to have quantum resistant cryptography, which is something that globally, the banking system, central banking system, national security, NSA, the apparatus of everything relies upon this. So it will be a global challenge together as we progress to this next phase as well. Anyway, I just wanted to say that because you'll probably get a lot of people fudding you don't buy Bitcoin because of this. I'm getting more and more people asking me questions about it. And I know the community will always be on it. It is, one of these things that we need to resolve. And when the time is right, it will happen. And that is everything that I've got you for this week in Bitcoin. We now move over to part 2, where we're going to be going through this week in macro. Now, if you enjoyed the Bitcoin section, we got a lot more to go through. We're going to be going through the New World Order 2025 meeting that I believe is happening very shortly and is being laid the framework, but we're going to follow the money so that you don't fool the media and you don't get caught up in all the propaganda, and you know how to position yourself as we transition to a world of Bitcoin AI and central bank digital currencies. Now, I need a favor from you right now. If everybody watching this that hasn't subscribed to my YouTube channel, hit subscribe, hit the bell symbol, and hit all, I would get to 100K subscribers. I was on fast growth, and as soon as I started revealing things that the Proof of Weapons Network doesn't like, it completely shadow banned my content. But I can get that for review by getting over 100,000, and then it can have a blue check. And I believe that we are moving to a new world of transparency. And so now that many of the things that I covered over the years are becoming true and fact with the US aid and the National Endowment of Democracy and all the leaks that are happening right now, I believe that if I could get over 200,000, have a review, I could start being ranked in the algorithm again, and we can get more and more people prepared and ready for this world transitioning. And so I would like you to help me get over 100,000. I'm having to push. And please do like, share, add a comment. It helps the algorithm when they do that review just so I can get out of this shadow banning now that we are moving to a world where what we're discussing may be in line with the strategic goals of peace for the world now that this new world order is being set. So please do that right now. I'm going to take some water to protect my voice, and then we're going to jump right into this week in macro. Right, macroeconomics. Right now, we are about to have what I believe to be one of the most important meetings with the most important people that are going to be discussing the structure of the new world order by putting together and understanding the new world that we have found ourselves in. If you have watched previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that I've been talking about how tariffs and sanctions and everything that's happened is driving a desire to weaken the dollar as a strategic goal of America so that they can do a controlled demolition of the apparatus that was propping up the euro dollar and the petrodollar because they're trying to prevent what we were being driven into, World War III, having known that China would have won because they would have sat on the side while everyone else blew each other up, just like America did, because they had the manufacturing base, the cheap manufacturing base during World War I and World War II. And we were setting up for that. And I believe that there has been a strategic move with the Trump administration to recognize that Biden was taking us down the darkest place, because he would have been fine because he took all the bribes and all the money and everything that's being exposed right now. So who are those important people of the New World Order of 2025, and what does it look like? Well, to analyze that, we need to understand and dive into the macro section, and then I'll go a little bit deeper in the geopolitical section to add a little bit more meat to the bone. So focusing purely on macro and finance and following the money, who are the important people today? Well, Putin, Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia, and Trump in the new vision for the Trump administration and the MAGA movement, and what the new vision for America as a regional power rather than global peace looks like. They are all going to be meeting, and the others that are not invited to that room is for a very important reason. And I'll tell you how I read into it. Remember, don't listen to what they say. Follow the money in order to understand what they do. Then they'll put some stupid narrative in order to fool you. And before you know it, boom, it's happened before your eyes. Okay, so when I follow the money, and again, I'm open to changes as the environment changes, but this is what I see. This is my best thinking today. They're meeting to discuss Ukraine, but it's not about Ukraine. Primarily, they're going to be discussing exactly the macro environment, and they're going to be discussing exactly who out of Saudi Arabia, Russia going through to BRICS, and America is going to be supplying Europe and other regions across the global south and China with the resources that they need, and what that looks like in the 2025 New World Order meeting. That is what this meeting is about. So we need to understand, what do each of these players want? And we can't use the traditional narrative. We need to understand that, look, come on. This was a war between a covert war, a proxy war between America and Europe, because Europe was getting gas. Germany, the manufacturing base, was getting gas from Russia. So the CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline and did a controlled demolition, did regime change across the region, through the lobby groups that they control, primarily the Israeli lobby that has significant influence over European leadership, was able to trick and use media funded by US aid, funded the BBC, funded the Ukraine media, funded the US media, Fox, CNN, millions and millions was exposed as the budget through Associated Press and the propaganda network of the CIA in order to make Europeans believe that they were fighting for democracy. Remember, Zelensky was the result of a CIA coup in 2014 that we're told is Russian propaganda, of course. Of course, there's Russian propaganda as well. But we are here where we are right now because of that operation. Now, Russia resisted against that in order to get more power at the negotiation table, and Russia won against America. But America is still very strategically important. And because we transitioned from the Biden administration, which would have taken us to World War III under Harris, and because Biden, Genocide Joe, and Harris, Holocaust Harris, were doing anything that the Israeli lobby would ask them to do, they were being driven into the World War III path. Okay? And Trump administration, I believe, is showing a front of course, the Israel relationship is important, but behind the scenes, I think there are significant negotiations. And the most important player in that negotiation is the top G MBS. Now, I'm no fan of any of these people. This is not about what I like. This is not about what I want. This is about what is happening right now. And the sovereign wealth funds that have been built across the Gulf Cooperation GCC regions is headed up by MBS, who only has a population of 35 million to service all of the largest oil resources, while America has to service 350 million. And so all of that excess oil is controlling the price of oil and the most important player in OPEC plus. So if you want to drive down the price of oil, you got to speak to Putin, but you got to speak to MBS most importantly. And so this now, given where we are, because America didn't win via its proxy in Ukraine, we're now sitting down at the table and deciding what the new world order looks like, which is very different under the Trump administration. And it is all of the regional superpowers as a result of what happened in the proxy war using Israel in the Middle East and using Ukraine in Europe. And remember, the strategic goal in a retreat is the weakening of the dollar in order to rebuild a manufacturing base, in order to be able to have an America first agenda, to strengthen, the export market and to weaken the price of imports. If you watch previous macro sections, I don't want to go deeper into that as well, which requires weakening the budget deficit, because the excessive debt was all built up based upon printing dollars, wiping out the American middle class, sending them abroad so that they come back into America and they are used in order to buy weapons, which is the apparatus of the proof of weapons network. And that required cold revolution so you could stop any progress of peace, stop any democracies and replace them with dictators so that they're easier to negotiate, like you see with Egypt right now, like you see in Saudi Arabia right now. Again, I'm not saying any of these things to judge countries. The people are different from the governments. I'm just talking about the reality of how the dollar works. This is also in order to use oil to combat the inflation that results as a part of this. There will be massive inflation from these policies, because going to isolationism is inherently inflationary, because you don't have a manufacturing base based upon a large population and the dynamics of China. And America wants to ensure that as less of the business goes to China and as much of it within its sphere of influence goes to America, and it wants to use tariffs in order to ensure that people are purchasing from America as part of their geopolitical regional power strategic goal. This requires a monetary reform. And so I believe that if the advisors are smart enough, they'll be using all this audit the Fed, audit Fort Knox, crypto policy, stablecoin policy, Bitcoin strategic reserves, to actually place a credible monetary reform as they execute a controlled demolition, because the Federal Reserve has a globalist agenda of the shareholders, which are the banks. And those banks don't care whether it's America or China. They're invested in all of it. BlackRock is hedged for everything. In fact, that's why BlackRock did the controlled demolition in collaboration with the Fed and the SEC in order to make sure that the Bitcoin ETF was approved, so that they could plan that transition as well. And they could plan that transition for their customers, that want to continue pushing capital into BlackRock, which hedges across whatever world order and whatever influence is needed. That's why America simultaneously is planning to be crypto capital of the world under the Trump administration, so that we can manage this soft landing as soon as it gets hostile with the Fed proof of weapons network debt-based Ponzi scheme that uses the shareholders to try and drive to war again. Okay. So I believe that the meeting is not so much about Ukraine, and it's not so much enemies sat down with each other engaging in diplomacy. It is mainly about the discussions of which division of each of the regions, what the lines look like, and who's going to be supplying the oil and gas, and who's going to get the rare earth minerals that are required to manufacture chips for artificial intelligence, as well as Bitcoin mining as well. And what those lines are going to look like and what those quotas are going to look like, because remember, the central banking system has moved us to peak centralization. And these are the three key players in the so-called pretend democracies that sit underneath this power structure. Remember, I've always said the proof of weapons network has the central bank Ponzi scheme at the front, which is proof of weapons by selling weapons. And then you have intelligence agencies that are representing corporate interest rather than national security. And what America is doing is saying, let's get that. Let's reduce the budget for defense and actually do it for defense, which means using it for national security rather than protection of corporate interest. But the corporate interest has already taken over America because people like Elon Musk is more strategically important than the government, but they need to partner together. And so that's why lobby groups changes the laws to favor that, and you will get more wealth inequality under this model, but it has to be done in order to make sure that America doesn't blow up from the path that Biden and Harris could have taken us as well. Anyway, these lines are going to be drawn between informal trade finance agreements and rare earth minerals, oil and gas are going to be what they're actually negotiating. And by the way, that was exactly why the CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline, and why there was a war with Europe, and why the ECB was a Fed first central bank, and why Europe is being tricked into thinking that they're still, or Europeans anyway, by those funded by these illegitimate media networks, are thinking that they're fighting for democracy and Putin, the dictator, cannot win the war. That is designed to set up the environment that is needed, and that is why these people are meeting, I believe. Now, remember, none of them are enemies. Trump, MBS, Putin, they all respect each other. You know, the media is trying to make it out like, you can see all the narratives. You go, I don't even need to repeat the media narratives. You just follow the money, and that's what we do at Bitcoin Hard Talk. Okay. So Ukraine was a proxy war. It was an attack on Europe. It was to create oil dependency of Europe and gas dependency on America as part of this strategic move. The primary interest of America, who is sat at the table, represented by Trump, and they will have the Marco Rubios and all the others that will be negotiating it once the captains of the proof of weapons network are sat at the table. So what does America? Well, America still wants somewhat of a proof of weapons network. It doesn't want to control, a complete demolition. It still has a military industrial complex, and it still needs to make sure that there are demand for dollars, but it wants to reform the dollar. And so that needs to be done in a controlled way, as far as I see it. So they still want to make sure that there are security contracts. So if Saudi Arabia wants to purchase security from America, that will be negotiated at this table. What else have they got? Right. What they have to figure out is the future of Europe, and Europe doesn't get a seat at the table, and Zelensky doesn't get a seat at the table. And so that is why they are negotiating the future of the euro dollar. the ECB and the Fed are the ones that are able to execute whatever the mission that is decided in this as well. And, Ukraine is not important to that mission. And Zelensky will just flee at the end of this. NATO is important, but America wants to make sure that the dollars and the money get into the military industrial complex. But Europe wants it to go to Germany, UK, and France and focus on Europe first. But they need to take over the retreat of America. So they need to believe that war is the option. So Europe will be saying, we're still fighting for democracy. This is a fight against evil. You'll still have all that narrative because they want to get the money and make sure it goes into the local base. America is delivering a different message. They're saying this is corrupt. Ukraine is not a democratic leader. He's a dictator. He's only got 4% support. So that message is being pushed out because they want to say, well, we're going to spend less on NATO, but the negotiation is that you're all going to spend more on military because you're still doing the war machine, the fake threat, and you're going to buy it from America. And we need strategic weapons against Europe that will be focusing on themselves if they stand against the European Central Bank policy. So what else do they need to negotiate? US needs to negotiate the future of the Middle East and the petrodollar. So remember, back in World War I, Sykes-Picot, the British Empire set up this agreement, which is to make sure you draw lines across the region and you have covert operations through MI6 in colored revolutions and funding, fake groups and then calling them ISIS and Al Qaeda and all that stuff. It was a model that we created to weaken the Soviet Union after the Soviet Union was installed in Russia by the Bolshevik Revolution during World War I, replaced Russia with the Soviet Union, installed Marxist communists, installed the Federal Reserve, replaced capitalism in America to get it to almost $40 trillion debt before it needs this reform, and benefited from the failed ideology of superior oppression and authoritarianism of communism, and saying that you're doing it to equalize for the people and profiting from both sides. And so after World War II, the apparatus of the proof of weapons network was set up. The Bank of England transitioned it over to the Fed. And then we had the petrodollar construct, which made sure the Middle East was in a constant state of war. And so they installed Israel as an outpost in order to create all of those problems and make sure that there was never peace in the Middle East, to prop up the demand for the dollar and the Kissinger petrodollar negotiations after destroying those regions. And the ones that wanted peace had to remain a dictator, fend off democracy and revolution. The only one that didn't successfully do that was Iran, because it had a revolution. And so Iran becomes the enemy because it didn't keep the dictator that originally the CIA wanted to install in the 1953 declassified operations, where they replaced the democracy with the dictator, because Shell was a company, or British Petroleum wanted to take all of Iran's oil, and Iran wanted to nationalize it. And so the people wanted that in their democracy. So they placed democracy with dictator. And then there was a revolution as a resistance against that. Anyway, so now it all makes sense. So what do you need if you are retreating from that strategy? You're basically saying, the GCC, you're now in charge. We want some of your money, your sovereign wealth. We want to do a deal. We're no longer going to destabilize the region. So what do you do with Israel and Palestine? And that needs to be resolved. So that will be figured out. Now, what did Trump do in order to strong arm before the meeting? He said, we're going to own Gaza. We know that, as you've seen from the hostage swap every week, going a bit more into the geopolitical. Let me not go there. I'll go there in the geopolitical section. But anyway, the resistance is still there. No, I'll save that for that anyway. So Trump going in, or US going in, would require, another war Israel would have weaponized that in order to get the war with Iran. The war with Iran would have been a lot worse than Iraq and Afghanistan, and Iran is strategically important for both Russia and China. So that was the Holocaust Harris and Genocide Joe, support genocide in order to make sure that we end up in World War III and protect the violence of the petrodollar based upon Israel first strategy, which Biden was delivering with Antony Blinken lying every week, putting up their hand in United Nations, voting against peace using the veto vote, everything we've covered on previous broadcasts. Anyway, Trump wants Europe to be dependent upon US energy. That's very important. It wants to export its energy, to rebalance its deficit, and to have a weakening of the dollar so that it can rebuild its manufacturing base, so that it can have regional power strategically. So what that means essentially, if I were that, and again, I wouldn't engage in this because I opted out with Bitcoin, so I don't need to engage in such games. But when you follow the money, it means Europe needs to be in a continual state of believing that it's at war with Russia and it is buying weapons from America while buying energy from America. So that's what America wants. That's what it wants for Europe. The European Central Bank doesn't care about the Europeans, so they're going to sacrifice the economy, and Europe is going to get deeper and deeper into wealth inequality as a result of that, because they're not doing what is Europe first. And Europe first is what they were doing before the CIA operation. It was building its manufacturing base. It was having nuclear energy. It was taking cheap oil from Nord Stream pipeline. It was having trade with China and BRICS, which is why America waged war through a covert operation, a series of regime changes, and everything that we saw since then, which led to the end of the negotiations because Russia resisted it and won. Now, Trump also wants energy prices down to combat the inflation that will be created from this policy. So that requires, and what does that mean? Because he needs domestic popularity. Eggs are going to all-time high prices. That creates negativity. Trump is saying, don't worry, this is a temporary measure, but everything is inflationary. And you've got artificial intelligence, which is deflationary through unemployment. And so you need to transition to monetary reform so that you can have, for example, the $5,000 dividend to all citizens, which is a form of universal basic income, which will probably be delivered on a stable coin because they are choosing stablecoin technocracy and data over Federal Reserve proof of weapons. And that fight will continue. That friction will probably still be there as well. But Trump also wants access to Ukraine because Ukraine has the rare earth minerals that is required in order to power this artificial intelligence and the semiconductor chips, so that Taiwan doesn't reunify so China doesn't reunify with Taiwan, which China doesn't want to do, but the Biden administration was pushing for that in order to profit from World War III as well on the previous pass. So he wants Europe to essentially be dependent upon weapons from the US, and it wants Europe to cut off its trade from China, because America wants to compete with China as much as possible, even though that's hugely inflationary for Europe when it needs deflation. And Trump will want his family to essentially have real estate transactions as a result of developing Gaza, because he's got his son-in-law has a fund with Kushner that took the money from the GCC and Saudi Arabia in order to invest in all of this redevelopment. So Trump will want real estate to be deployed in both Ukraine and Gaza so he can personally benefit. And on the crypto side, he's created all the tools and apparatus for stable coins, for Bitcoin ETFs, for social media based upon TradFi, meme coins, stable coins, World Liberty financial tokens, governance token, DeFi platform. So he's setting up everything to profit from this transition as well. And he wants to make sure that his family get a cut of everything. But he doesn't want ownership. He doesn't want to have troops in Ukraine and doesn't want to have troops in America, and he doesn't want to own Gaza because that would be the very same thing that props up the wartime model, and we are moving away from that model because the rules have been set, and I believe that the new world order is being set, and that's just a liability. Owning Gaza means you have the liability of protecting it. Owning Ukraine means you have the liability of protecting it, and Russia doesn't want that. Russia wants to be, a conduit between BRICS, a good relationship with America, and whatever it negotiates in this new world order with its relationship with Europe. Russia, on the other hand, wants US containment because he knows that he's got a good relationship with Trump, but what happens after Trump? Is the global controllers of finance going to move to the old model and launch colored revolutions, expand NATO, and try and remove the security of the agreement that led to peace of the post-Cold War era, and try and prop up the dollar again and do all the same things that led us to World War III? And so he wants to make sure that doesn't happen. So he needs some de-dollarization. He needs the BRIC mission to happen. Now, Trump has to posture. He needs to say 100% tariffs on anyone that comes up against the dollar. I'm going to own the whole of Gaza. He needs to posture this in order to deliver this, because the actual negotiation is going to be isolationism and a retreat of America to regional power in the end, and a weakening of the dollar in order to try and make that happen. Why? Because he's a real estate guy. So he wants interest rates down on the long 10, on the long side, because also America needs to renegotiate all of this debt. It said it's not going to refinance. It says it is going to refinance. It's not going to expire any of the debt, because that's part of the controlled transition as well. And so basically, America's bargaining chips in this whole setting of the world order is obviously sanctions, which is what Russia wants to be removed from, because Russia wants to trade. It wants and also it wants the trade policy with China to be set in a way where it's not destabilizing, but America gets as much of it as it can. And Russia is the key, and Iran is the key to providing that oil and gas to China and having global South BRICS corridors. And Europe's kind of caught in the middle, which is why if Europe doesn't figure out how to be independent and sovereign and move away from the ECB proof of weapons network, it will get destroyed in this whole process. So Europe is set to be the loser. And that's why Europe's not at the table. And that's why Zelensky's not at the table. And also Xi Jinping is the competing power, so he's not at the table. And remember, because of these sanctions, India became an oil exporter, where it was selling the oil to Europe from Russia and getting a clip in between. And Modi has already sat down at the White House and met with Trump and decided what their role in BRICS is going to be. So what does this actually mean? What is his negotiation chip as well? Well, the negotiation chip as well is removing US military support for Israel, which was the apparatus of preventing peace in the Middle East, and making Israel get along with its neighbors and normalize with its neighbors, rather than being an outpost of America in order to, create all the problems that are happening, which then requires a two-state solution. So that is part of the negotiation as well. What else has America got in its negotiation chips? Well, it's got the military posturing that it's going to have with Iran. Is it going to allow Israel to target the military nuclear bases, which is what Israel wants in order to be the superpower in the region? But the GCC is the superpower. And I believe that the New World Order is preventing Israel becoming the superpower and ensuring that the GCC is the superpower, and normalizing and making Israel actually be a natural two-state, rather than covert operations in order to create violence across the region and make the justification of the fake war on terror and the clean break plan, which Netanyahu wrote, that got America into all of these forever wars, that wiped out middle-class America, created inflation, and got the government $36 trillion into debt that is now being exposed as complete criminality, propping up crime networks, and everything in between that we're seeing right now as a result of the US aid stuff. So Russia wants control over its part of Ukraine, and it has its current occupation. And America sacrificed 1 million Ukrainian soldiers to achieve its goal and make sure that Russia and Europe weren't pushed together in between with China so that it has some more power into this negotiation. And now it has those negotiations through the sanctions and various other stuff. Now, what does Russia want? Well, Russia wants to actually open up those pipelines and sell some gas to Europe. And so they'll be negotiating. What is the split? Remember, Putin and Trump are sat around, and MBS is sat around, and they're all friends essentially saying, what's the new world order? What do we need? So you get more of a percentage there. You get less of a percentage there. You get more of a percentage there. If you do that, you give me X percent there, then we'll get Israel to normalize and stop and give a two-state solution. And we'll make sure that you get this amount of rare earths and you own this amount of land. And Trump, you get this deal. And Saudi, you get to invest this money in this AI. And then you get this rare earth. And you get to do that business with China. But you need to make sure that not too much of that is empowering China. And America gets to negotiate down this route. And that is the new world order of 2025. We are witnessing in real time that negotiation. Russia wants sanctions to be lifted. And so you'll see when we do the geopolitical side, there's some narrative around that. Remember, don't listen to what the politicians say. Listen to the money and follow the money, and you'll stop being fooled so much. And then you can position yourself and recognize the power of Bitcoin in this whole restructuring of the new world order that we are witnessing in real time together. So Russia wants all of its businesses to be opened up. It wants all of the Russian companies to be able to work with different regions. It wants BRICS. It wants its reserves returned, but that's their chip. You return our $350 billion, but we'll spend it as allowed or as negotiated in our agreement, while Russia uses that to rebuild its strategic reserves and potentially have a BRICS Bitcoin integration. All of the things that can happen when you open up the possibilities now that we have auditable, transportable, and if you can get the Lightning Network stablecoin going, this could work incredibly well for the regions that want to adopt this strategy and beta test it too. So Russia wants the removals of sanctions. I believe as part of the negotiation, it will be allow a new BRICS currency eventually. I don't think it will come immediately. They'll be posturing around that. And I think that's an opportunity. And what does Saudi Arabia want? Well, Saudi Arabia wants continued access to the Europe energy market with the GCC. So they need to negotiate. Europe, you don't get any say. You get that amount from Saudi, you get that amount from Russia, and you get that amount from America. Saudi also wants Russia commitment to BRICS, because Saudi knows that if it has a defense or security contract with America, then it needs to protect that it doesn't have full dependency. So it wants to split the petrodollar, and you can control. Saudi can now be the controller of not only the oil price, but also the balance between BRICS and America, and ensure that it can control that balance if any of those regional powers get too out of whack. And it can then ensure that it doesn't have covert regime change, and it can secure itself. And therefore, what else does it want? It needs to prevent a revolution of its people. So if you watched last week, Egypt is having almost a revolution. They started deploying military to make sure it's not going the wrong way, because Trump was saying he's going to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Jordan, the same. Jordan went and visited Trump, and he gave diplomatic gesture, but he didn't bow down to Trump. He said, the king of Jordan said, we'll make sure that 2,000 Palestinians with critical cancer and illness are allowed into Jordan to get the healthcare they need, which he was doing already. But he wanted to show a diplomatic posture because Trump put him on national TV and wanted to see what he could get him to agree to. But he said, without saying it, that Egypt has got a plan and it doesn't involve ethnic cleansing, but you get to posture with Israel, make them think that they're about to have America occupying Gaza and the Palestinians are going to be ethnically cleansed. And so he's going for the worst situation so that when he sits down with Saudi Arabia, he can say, okay, well, we won't do that. We'll give you a two-state solution and we'll give you the security that you need in order to contain Israel. And they can just be part of GCC normalization. I get to put my hand up saying I created world peace. And if he pulls this off, he damn deserves it. And the Abraham Accords is back on, but it's not the fake Biden one that was going to lead to the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians that he was covering up on, and a movement towards World War II because Saudi can't normalize. Because remember, to prevent a revolution, what happened with Iran, they need to believe that Saudi is giving the Palestinian cause, which is an important Muslim cause. And the Egyptians need to believe that. And the Jordanians need to believe that as well. Whereas the Biden Holocaust, Genocide Joe and Holocaust Harris were making that happen. They were trying to push for that to happen, which would have been a revolution. And then they would have installed their implants. And then Israel would have been given nuclear power. And then America would have had troops. And then they would have had to go to war with Iran. And then Russia and China would have had to protect it. They would have had to reunify. And we'd end up destroying the entire world, all because no two-state solution is given. So, what is the promise that Saudi wants? Saudi wants no more interference from the CIA, no more interference from MI6. We want real peace in the Middle East, and the GCC wants to be the superpower, and we want governance over our region, and we have to have a two-state solution. So we will control Israel, and you will stop covert operations in order to topple the region. We want a solution for Syria. We want a solution for Iraq. We want the removal of occupations of all the oil, all of the wheat. And we want to take care of our destiny so that we can optimize peace in the region rather than outside interference. And in order to achieve that, Saudi Arabia wants a security deal, and it wants to be a competing, legitimate nuclear power, because at the moment, only Israel has its covert, illegal nuclear powers. So it needs to be competing with that in order to contain Israel, while Netanyahu has all these public displays saying that we're going to take over Gaza and we're going to ethnically cleanse. And but that's the negotiation chip. Now, it's very important to America that EU doesn't get destroyed. So it needs to be destabilized and weak, and it needs to buy America, which is why the ECB is doing the Fed first policy, but it can't be destroyed. So they need to figure out how it actually gets some cheap gas from Russia and is able to work with some in China, but it wants to use all its negotiation chips to make sure as much of that comes to America so it can be the superpower in its region. And Europe was the pawn. Europe, you got checkmated, you lost. That's why your economies are destroyed. That's why Germany's in recession. And that's why you as Muppets are still following the USAID propaganda narrative in your media, saying that we're trying to fight a dictator and we're trying to fight for democracy. I am sorry this death had to happen. It is disgusting. It is immoral. But that was the old model of the euro dollar and petrodollar that Americans are being exposed right now, saying, God damn it, there was blood on our hands all along. And some people, because this wasn't the American people, some people are still holding on to that old narrative because it's too hard to believe that everything was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. And hundreds of millions had to die for the proof of weapons network. And all of this lies had to be told. But now we're in a moment of truth. And the reason I'm fairly bullish, but very skeptical, is that I think it makes economic sense for everybody right now. And I think Bitcoin can deliver the proof of work that all of these countries need in order to remain a level of sovereign independence to fight off the economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund and have a resistance against that as well in these currency wars. So my forecast based upon all of this in the macro section, US will drop support for Ukraine, and that already happened. But EU will continue to keep support for Ukraine because that is the destabilizing force that America needs, and that is what will be negotiated. And we ain't got any strong, independent, sovereign leadership across Europe because they're the donkeys that fell for this whole thing, and they're still falling for it because Keir Starmer and Macron from France, they're all going to the White House tomorrow, and they'll be told how it is. And what will they do? They'll say, F you, America, we're going to support the military-industrial complex, and we're going to destroy our economy for the European Central Bank. I'll show you. And then Putin, MBS, and Trump will set the new world order of 2025. And unless Europe resists against it, which they won't, because the leadership is too weak, too late, they'll end up losing. And the sanctions will be lifted to help, grease the wheel, make sure the money is released. And remember, some of the money that was sanctioned is in Europe, some of it's in America. So they'll be using that as the bargaining chips in the negotiations. America, what do they want? They probably want some of this money to go to US contractors to rebuild the war zones. And Trump wants to make a shitload of money out of it as well. So he wants to personally invest. And companies like Palantir will build a artificial intelligence surveillance state. And all of the companies across America, the military will provide the new artificial intelligence, and America will invest in that, and they will double down, recognizing we just need to build surveillance state as a regional superpower. And so we'll put all of that money and the savings that come in into the technology companies that will benefit from all of these contracts. Let's build Stargate. And that's why Elon paid, in order to make sure that he's on top of that network as well. So America wants to rebuild the war zones. Now, remember, BlackRock was the largest beneficiary. In previous episodes, we talked about how they got the securitized loans, and Britain bet its whole economy and restructured with the IMF in order to support this. They gambled their whole economy on this. They need to figure that out, because unfortunately, the regions have been determined, and this could be disastrous for the UK, because Keir Starmer is an implant. Remember, he tried to take out Julian Assange with the fake sex scandal in order to prevent Israel being exposed through WikiLeaks, where we get all of these documents where you can fact check everything I'm saying. That helps me follow the money with the real stuff. What does MBS want? MBS also wants oil prices stabilized to be the controller of the oil price, so that he can have the leverage between the BRICS, the amount of the oil that's used for BRICS and the amount that's used for America. That's why I think the US will allow BRICS to expand. It's just posturing on terms of the tariffs. Behind the scenes, they'll keep it fragmented. They don't want it to get too much power, but because Russia won the war, they have to retreat. And that's why they're no longer the global hegemon. Everything we are experiencing is a win-win, because we no longer need death, destruction, and violence to prop up the dollar, as long as it can be restructured, and we'll keep carrying that. I believe after this, Saudi will stay aligned with both America and BRICS through security and trade. And I think the GCC will be in charge of reconstructing Gaza. And it will really be Saudi and Egypt that will have the basically major say on how it is rebuilt, what the two-state solution is, and how you'll keep Israel in check now that America is retreating in order to make it normalized as well, rather than sabotaging every two-state solution and using like Epstein blackmail networks where Israel took over Bill Clinton to prevent this happening, and make sure that peace didn't happen. You have the Oslo Accords, and then you had the sabotaging and the assassinations that happened within Egypt when it got close. Sorry, not within Egypt. That happened within Israel when one of the presidents of Israel wanted to actually move towards peace, and then it was replaced back with Netanyahu, who's propping up the proof of weapons network. Anyway, what are we seeing right now on the macro scene? Trump is dismantling the US proof of weapons network right in front of our eyes, which is what I was saying everybody needs to prepare for. And there will be forces that really don't want that to happen. America first is bad for the global forces, and the global forces control America, and the political financing through the infiltration of Israeli lobbying, which supports Zionism, is going to be a very, very complex one to manage within America, which is why you're seeing huge support and posturing, but a recognition of reality and a recognition that America couldn't have won World War III. And no one would have benefited from it. And we don't want that to happen anyway. So this is a win-win all around. I'm really hopeful that this is where we're moving. Now, there is a big problem. The longer the US proof of weapons network run by the Federal Reserve is allowed to continue, the more wealth inequality will continue. And because the large companies, and there's a debt-based monetary policy, the wealth inequality won't reverse, because you'll get the inflation driven, you'll get unemployment, and you'll get a monetary reform that can combat it. But if the Fed wins out over Treasury, you won't be able to combat it, which will lead to more wealth inequality. And so that needs to be managed as well, which is not what you have in China, because China has a state banking system, and it doesn't have a destabilizing globalist force. And so China can not have, doesn't have to invest in all of this. It can just invest in building countries rather than destroying companies with your proof of weapons network. And it doesn't have globalist infiltration. And so that will be the difference in these two models. So America needs the monetary reform. China doesn't really necessarily need it because it's already got that system. It leads to more authoritarianism. And America has its freedom of speech in exchange for a financial system that's a debt-based Ponzi scheme that's causing much wealth inequality. The Fed wiped out the middle class. That's why it's so destructive on itself. And corporate interests won. And that is the model that was set up in 1913 when the Bank of England and the European bankers installed the Federal Reserve, as we covered earlier as well. Tariffs will be the negotiation chip. And if they do get executed, then this could create more wealth inequality or less. I'll keep analyzing the economic effects through it, but it depends if it's inflationary. So all of the inflation is the forces, and tariffs may be that force, or they can be either that, but we'll cover that in different things. But I hope you're starting to understand why I believe we're only just getting started within Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is the solution for the US to have a monetary reform through Bitcoin strategic reserves and stablecoin regulations in order to fight back and create an alternative systems and independence from the Federal Reserve globalist agendas through the banking shareholders. And by setting up who can regulate away from OCC and Fed and maybe over to CFTC or SEC with a regime change, which we are experiencing right now, that is pro-America first, then you could end up fighting the forces. And that is the American struggle. And I believe if you have Bitcoin strategic reserves, which is the Cynthia Lummis bill, then I think you could get what you need and America can be a great regional power without all of the horrible things that came along with the Federal Reserve's proof of weapons network. What does the Middle East need in order to win? It needs the efficient allocation of its natural gas so that it does not have dependency upon any type of central bank infiltration. So the Middle East regions can repurpose their energy to mining Bitcoin. It can set up a network with Bitcoin strategic reserves. It can say Saudi doesn't want to do that, but UAE does that. It can set up whatever rules it wants to set up. And it can become that intermediary between BRICS. BRICS can build using Bitcoin as the solution to the problem of how do you have a currency backed by gold and decentralization with auditability and perfect transportability, and not the problem that we're having right now where Fort Knox need auditing and the Bank of England can't deliver upon that gold. Bitcoin is the solution for that. So Middle East has a solution, US has a solution, BRICS can have a solution where it can trade and settle, and it could invest in supporting Lightning Network on stable coins, whatever it wants to do in order to reach that infinite scalability between that. And it can set up its trade routes with no outside central bank interference. And we can have a global South, which actually has a network built upon backing gold, Bitcoin, and resources. Why not? Not saying all this is going to happen, but you see where this can go because we created the game theory of apolitical proof of work that no nation controls and is connected to nobody that can be assassinated and corrupted. This is the beauty. And what can Europe do? Europe, the one that was the weakest links with the weakest hands, that fell for the most amount of woke propaganda, that sacrificed the Europeans for the ECB Fed first policy. They can fight against the ECB if they grew a backbone and we could change the leadership and actually had something. So if Europe wants to be independent from the ECB, and it wants to be independent from US, and it wants to be independent from Russia and BRICS, it can build its strategic reserves, it can expel the European Central Bank, and it can actually focus on European people first. So if countries recognize that, if our leadership is good enough, if people can recognize this, but do we want to wait and depend upon our leaders? Hell no. We want to build our own Bitcoin strategic reserves in self-custody so that we can keep earning, as you know, take our fiat currency, spend less than they earn, resist against debt, spend less than they earn, put the savings in Bitcoin and own more Bitcoin each month than the previous month, because they may crash Bitcoin and we get more Bitcoin for our fiat currency. It may go parabolic as they adopt it, and therefore our influence and wealth grows in fiat terms. And we get a free ride on front running the whole system as the world recognizes the true power, and we can engage in investing in the companies that support this transition. And we don't have to wait for any of our politicians or any of our governments, because we can build strategic independence and change jurisdiction and take our wealth with us, rather than being stuck in an oppressive regime where your cash can only go to $10,000. Your gold can't come across the border, so you end up putting it in Singapore, and you're a mercy to them creating paper contracts against you. And Bitcoin solves this. Fix the money, fix the world. And if Argentina wants to do it instead of rug pulling through Libra, why not lead the world and show the world across South America and Central America, based upon the great work of Bukele that had to bow down to the IMF because they didn't have enough Bitcoin? Stop rug pulling, and we can move to a new era. And I'm excited about that. And I think we have a lot more to build and a lot more to do. But I'm not ignorant enough to rely upon these centralized politicians. That is a world that's gone more and more centralized as they try and take it to an AI central bank digital currency that rules the world eventually. Maybe. But Bitcoin is the resistance, and we need decentralized social media, and we need decentralized artificial intelligence and all that. Russia and US, in the end, the deep state, they were on the same side all along. And I'm so sorry that you fell for it. And I'm so sorry that so many had to die. But this is exactly how the proof of weapons network was designed in the first place, because the Bank of England was set up to get governments in debt perpetuity and fund wars and create violence. And it's never changed. And it's always been the same, which is why it's called the proof of weapons network. Anyway, US could get to reform the dollar if it wants to exit from that. It can use, it announced reciprocal tariffs, which is an interesting policy. And so the reciprocal tariffs is a way of normalizing across these regions and rebalancing the deficit, which is, some of the things. So I think Besant came out and he said that the US pays 350 billion in foreign taxes, and it only has 1/4 of GDP. And yet the US only received $59 billion in taxes, and the rest of the world has 3/4 of GDP. So they want to rebalance that. That's what reciprocal tariffs is about. I think it's a good strategy. I look forward to analyzing it. It levels out the playing field, and it allows for this evolutionary transition rather than revolutionary violence. And they're already starting to say, how do we do semiconductors, chips within America? That was a Biden policy that's come across to Trump, and there's going to be significant investment. They need all the rare earths, which is why they need part of the land of Ukraine, which is why they want to negotiate with Greenland, which is why they want to make outrageous statements with Canada so that they can end up with the negotiations that are needed in order to have that regional superpower. Dismantle the CIA drug trafficking cartels that get in through Mexico, and all of the violence and the open border policy that was an apparatus in order to create civil war. Dismantle that, and we don't need to go down that path. And so there was announced, for example, like Intel was in talks to be split into Broadcom and TSMC, which is the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company in Taiwan. And if that can be rebuilt or done within America, then we don't need to go down the disastrous China reunification with Taiwan, and we can remain with the status quo on that side of the region, because America can't afford it and would not have been able to protect. And that would have been the worst, most disastrous proxy war the world had ever seen. And I'm sure there are many companies that would have been hedging for that as well in the globalist side. So you need to watch out for that. So America is basically dismantling the proof of weapons network, reforming, looking what it looks like, building independence on chips so that it doesn't need to worry about Taiwan, building its relationship with India, now that India became essentially an oil exporter to Europe based upon these sanctions. That didn't really go to plan. And because BRICS won, you need to dismantle that and retreat, which is the Trump administration. And here's what I'm hoping for. That system does not require fake wars in the Middle East. It does not require fake war on terror. And so part of what they're doing is they're dismantling the fake training camp, to Mossad operations like ISIS and CIA operations like Al-Qaeda. And if you didn't get my tweet, I did a tweet thread of exactly how that was constructed, and how that was set up for the fake war and terror to weaponize religions, to create violence, and fool you into thinking half the things you probably think today, based upon complete deceit, deception. So check out that on X, where I did that whole tweet there. That went somewhat viral as well. Europe could free itself from the US if it wanted to by aligning with Russia and BRICS, dropping the ECB, building Bitcoin strategic reserves. That is still an option. Europe, you don't have to go sink in the ship. But you do need to retreat from America, and you do need to stop the narrative and fall for America's strategy of being a destabilized region by saying Putin is Hitler when it doesn't serve your interest, and it pretends you're fighting for democracy in order to fool people. That narrative needs to go away if you want to not sink the ship with the ECB. Interesting one around the monetary reform as well. The final parts of the macro section before we go into geopolitics. Trump confirmed that he would support Doge if it wanted to do a dividends tax return for every taxpayer. And so it wants to audit the IRS and then pay out a dividend to Americans if it can save amount from that. To me, that is the use case of a stablecoin universal basic income. And that may be the apparatus if it continues down this, Federal Reserve proof of weapons network, but it could be adoption for a stablecoin. So they need the stablecoin regulations and all the things that are happening after the stablecoin bill. This could also, as we said earlier in the Bitcoin section, this could be done in Lightning channels if we get our network up and running for privacy, scalability as well. Low transaction fees, all of that could be done if America wants to become the crypto capital of the world. And then the world could get onto that system like SWIFT, but without the control. That everyone could follow. It could be the leader if it wants, or it could allow BRICS to do it and other countries to do it. We could get, all of the different merchants within America to basically accept payments from this stablecoin that is used to distribute, a universal basic income. And that could provide the exact apparatus that you need to have resistance against the Fed. Then you've got a resistance of full reserve banking taking on fractional reserve banking. That's all you need. And then you could have that internal struggle of evolutionary or revolutionary. The Fed will be reluctant. They announced that they're reluctant to reduce near-term rate cuts. So Jerome Powell came out and said the reason that he gave for that is because the Trump administration's trade policy has potential inflationary side effects. So they don't want to reduce rates right now. So that's the Fed is waiting and seeing, doesn't think we can cut rates right now, but Trump will want potentially that to happen as well. But at the same time, the Trump is slashing government budget through Elon Musk, through the Department of Government Efficiency. And Percent came out and announced that it wants to cut that by 8% per year over 5 years. So if they achieve that goal, that is a 40% shrinkage in the US government, which is a complete resistance against the Federal Reserve, which wants as large a government as possible to execute its CIA covert regime changes and war, death, and destruction as it took over the dollar. This is kind of in line with artificial intelligence expectations. And so people need to see that. So expect slashings of budget, unemployment-based deflation as well. And essentially, they are defunding the traditional media as well. It's showing that they lied to us, that by exposing all of that, USAID was paying for all of the media and the covert regime change and the colored revolutions and the fake exporting democracy and making you feel like you're the good guys and everyone's the bad people. And we're the good people and everyone's the bad people. That was all done with taxpayer money. That all created inflation that wiped out the middle class. If that goes, we need to, that's in line with Elon's strategy that wants the new media to be on X. And so we are moving to that social credit type of system, that universal basic income type of system, that data artificial intelligence stable coins type of system. So everybody needs to build their resistance against that by owning Bitcoin as we build more decentralized technology and resist the centralizing forces that we have moved to. Percent came out and said that he does not want to term out any debt. And so therefore it's going to repackage the debt, is not going to allow it to expire and have less debt, because remember, the dollar is debt, so you have to roll over the dollar, and so it needs to roll it over with reduced rates, so that it's cheaper for the government to borrow as it restructures that and refinances as it plans this transition as well. It said that it doesn't want to compete with the Federal Reserve on quantitative tightening. That's why it's restructuring. and it doesn't want to term out the debt. So that's an interesting justification. You can say, yeah, we don't want to compete with the Fed that is reducing the amount of assets, so we will restructure it, and they're going to make sure they try and get the reduced rates as well. At the same time, China is just sat there weakening its currency to boost its exports. It's got its over leveraging that it had within the banking system, but it's got its state banking system and $1 trillion surplus, so it can get through all of that as well. And so that's why Xi Jinping does not have a seat at the table, because they're going to be negotiating as many deals away from China and over to America based upon the cards and the chips, but also based upon Russia having the power because it won the proxy war. And whether it can, what control Europe will have and whether it can transition to autonomy. But for now, Europe doesn't get a seat at the table. Ukraine doesn't get a seat at the table. India doesn't get a seat at the table because they're doing BRICS and Russia's doing the negotiations there. And that is the new world order that is being set up. And that is why the price of gold is going up. And gold almost has hit $3,000. As we realize that the Bank of England, the emperor, has no clothes. We eventually will audit Fort Knox, find out if the emperor has no clothes there. And there is talks around repricing the gold that Fort Knox allegedly has through top pieces of legislation. So currently, my understanding is on the balance sheet where this gold is meant to be, it prices gold at $40 rather than $3,000. So based upon the publicly disclosed amount of gold that should be audited, that's about a $10 billion asset that could essentially, based upon a $42 price, there could be almost $1 trillion asset, a $750 billion asset, depending on the price of gold, if they decided to reprice it. And then they could use that in order to sell some of the gold, buy Bitcoin through a Bitcoin strategic reserve, build the strategy, amount of developers to come into America, build out Lightning Network and the decentralized networks, as well as all the other things that they want to do, be crypto capital of the world, and build a great regional power based upon a weakening dollar and no violence. Defund the proof of weapons network. Hell yeah. Bitcoin may have created that peaceful resistance that we need, but we can opt out anyway. So gold is at almost $3,000. And remember, I debated Peter Schiff. I'll upload that to YouTube. Help me out as we get to the end of the macro section. The US can reprice their gold, buy Bitcoin, implement the Cynthia Lummis bill, and they can decline the oil rate, dollar, however it needs to do it. We're suddenly seeing China outperform the S&P as a result of this by about 20% this year as well, while Europe is in recession. So everything, when you follow the money, reflects this, that they need to drop oil prices. It needs to be stable. And that's what their negotiation to set up the new world order. Europe needs to get cheap gas, and it needs inflows into its own capital market, which requires it growing a pair and resisting against the euro dollar, while Saudi Arabia likely resists against the petrodollar in this negotiation. And the best way of Europe solving it, if you could get beyond the narrative, but then you realize, oh shit, we spent all that money comparing Putin to Hitler so that we could never normalize with Russia and allow Russia to join NATO and stabilize the region, do those contracts. You don't have to like how they govern, but recognize it was America that was the one that sacrificed those million people. And yes, Putin did do it. Say what you like, but if you emotionally negotiate, not based upon reality, more people will die. And we want to prevent more people dying. If you want that, America can finally, if it gets the negotiation right and Saudi has the right power, it can defund Israel. Israel can stop being a destabilizing, and Saudi can join BRICS, and we can have a open market for BRICS in the global south and all the things we've already covered. And we don't need these regime changes. We don't need any of that. And that is the world that I think Bitcoin could potentially give the world. And that is the piece that I'd like to see, and the reason why I think this is such an interesting time in financial history. And we need to understand the proof of weapon network and not suppress any that, which is why I would like you to support me as much as possible in helping me get to 100,000 subscribers. If you weren't watching in the beginning, ever since I covered this geopolitical stuff, my subscribers just dropped off. Not because we weren't getting the subscribers, because we don't have 100,000 subscribers, and we were completely shadow banned, and the notifications stopped, various other things. So if I can get above 100,000, now that all of this has been revealed to be truth, I don't need to be a tin hat conspiracy theory. I can back this up with evidence, and I can get YouTube to do a review of my channel. In the meantime, I'll back everything up in Bitcoin Hard Talk. If you're a member of Bitcoin Hard Talk, the membership portal for free on simondixon.com, you can get a free membership, and I'll make sure I back it up all on there. You can follow me on Rumble in case YouTube takes me down during the review. But if you help me get to 100,000 subscribers, I can get that review. We're at about 91.1 at the moment. Then hopefully we can get this message out to more and more people, because I want more and more people to be protecting themselves. I want this to drain the swamp, as it were, in real times. And I want basically everything to go through the way, get rid of the blackmails. And remember, we still got the 9/11 files, the JFK files, the Epstein files. And the way to know whether we are moving towards violence before we do the geopolitical section is as follows. If in all of those revealings, you don't get Mossad being exposed and just CIA being exposed, then unfortunately, this is the Israeli lobby winning. And remember, the Israel lobby doesn't want this plan, because their version is that there is no two-state solution. They are strategically important to topple the region, and they have their nukes. And they want to make sure that American troops are deployed to Gaza so that they can be coerced into a fake war on terror 2.0 with Iran that can then go back to the Biden genocide Joe and the Holocaust Harris strategy. And so if Trump reveals all that, or the administration reveals all that, and they don't tell you about urban movers with 9/11, they don't tell you about the dancing Israelis, they don't tell you about the nuclear proliferation agreements that JFK was involved in, they don't tell you that JFK was trying to dismantle APEC funding, they don't tell you that JFK launched a resistance against the Federal Reserve by creating $4 trillion of treasury notes backed by silver. If none of that comes up, then you know that you can't rely upon the information, and they are just simply trying to blame it on the CIA to achieve that goal, but Israel is still remaining in control. And then that is the Zionist struggle, because of the control of those that are controlling Congress. And that is what needs to be resisted against, because the two-state solution is the path to peace. And we don't need to go into World War III in order to achieve it, because the petrodollar is in control by the GCC, and that requires normalization. So that, with that said, we can move into the geopolitical section, which is the final section of this week in Bitcoin. And now, I covered a lot of geopolitics, but we're going to go through the events of this week and how they lead me to those conclusions, and so that you don't fall for the psyops that are being perpetuated through the media that is controlling the narrative to take us away from a peaceful path and over to World War III and some of those narratives by those that control the media and control the purse strings as well. Okay, so I'm going to take some water. Please do me a favor, do a like, a subscribe, a comment. If you're watching the recording, I read the comments, I'll reply to them and review them as well. And that really, really helps with the algorithm. I'm going to get my voice fresh again, and we're going to go through the final section and the geopolitics of the 2025 New World Order meeting that we're going to be having very soon. Okay, so this is part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 71, where we're going to be going through this week in geopolitics. This builds upon my theory about this week in Bitcoin and this week in macro. And we're discussing the 2025 New World Order meeting that is being set up. Now, we break these videos up into 3 now, just in case people want to go straight there. We also will have timestamps eventually, but some people watch it during the live. But I'm going to go through everything that happened this week in macro. And as a quick recap of what we covered as well, because we covered a lot of ground from my macro analysis and my Bitcoin analysis, I believe that the US is dismantling the euro dollar and the petrodollar in order to recognize that we were headed to World War III, which would have been disastrous for everybody. This is a massive retreat, and which is why the covert operations executed by the CIA, MI6, and Mossad are being exposed. And this is a recognition of honesty that we need to move to a multipolar world. And so people like me that have been discussing this stuff over the years, we don't need to be called tinfoil hat people, because we don't just have to refer to WikiLeaks that everyone then calls Russian propaganda. And we can point to the actual USA, CIA, Doge websites, and you will call it propaganda by dictators or the Democrat Party corruption or whatever you want to call it. But at least now we can say, here's the truth. Here's WikiLeaks. Here's the documents. Here's the USA declassifications. Here's all the evidence. But if you still want to be in a narrative, then I'm sorry, there is no helping you. Join me at Bitcoin Hard Talk, and hopefully you can learn how the world really works and follow the money rather than listening to the programming. And by the way, I'm happy if you completely disagree, but as long as you follow the money and you come up with your own analysis, then share it below in the comments. This is a group effort of learning from each other. I could get things wrong, but I want to hear your opinion. Tell me all about your opinions as well. Right. And so this means that we're retreating to regional trade wars rather than military through covert operations to create death and destruction in order to remain the US as the one hegemony power. And so what did we have this week? Well, Trump, not only did we have the Doge and Elon Musk dump the US aid that we covered last week in Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 70, but he dropped the hammer on the National Endowment of Democracy. Remember I said that's where all of the colored revolutions and all of the covert regime changes, and where the propaganda that made you think you're replacing dictators with democracy when everything's about the opposite so that there's more control, all of that propaganda, that all happened through the National Endowment of Democracy, as well as the USAID and the NGO networks that led to the criminal network, the drug trafficking, the human trafficking, the pedophilia blackmail rings, and the weapons manufacturing, weapons trafficking, and all of the funding of training camps to militant groups, and in order to make people think, of the propaganda campaigns. All of that happened through that. So dropped it, revealed the truth, and hopefully that's an end to that. So as I said, if it's a CIA front for all of those operations, and it's officially broke. Good riddance. It receives no money, and it can either be set up again if this is a covert operation, or this is a recognition that there is a new retreat and regional power as well. Funding has been frozen. The world knows the truth, and slowly but surely people will discover how much they've been lied to. It's going to create a lot of anger. It's going to need a lot of healing as well. So at the same time, we found out in geopolitical this week, basically China called for both Russia and the United States in this changing moment to reduce their nuclear arsenals. And so China wants to move to a denuclearization as a result of this new world order being set up. Now, whether it happens or not, whether you just think, oh, that's just China trying to equalize the playing field, but these are good things. These are the communications And this is why, Xi Jinping doesn't necessarily get a seat at the table, but Putin via BRICS is where, those meetings are going to be had as well. So the quote was from the China was, as the countries with the largest nuclear arsenals, the United States and Russia, Russia has slightly more than the United States, they should earnestly fulfill their special and priority responsibilities for nuclear disarmament, and they should reduce their nuclear arsenals. Maybe this is the type of thing that we can have. This is all good things. But I think it's interesting that these are the type of rhetoric you get when we're moving to multipolarity as well. Meanwhile, what did we see in Europe? Again, we had the Monarch Security Conference, and Vice President J.D. Vance gave a speech, and basically he was lecturing Europeans on wokeness. This is kind of in line with my belief around what's happening here. That after the covert operation where US waged war on Europe through its proxy implant into Ukraine, that Russia now won, and therefore there is a negotiation to set up a regional power rather than a hegemon. But as part of that, US needs to exert its dominance over Europe and say that we're no longer doing the war stuff. Europe, you buy the budget and you buy the weapons from us, expand NATO to 5% of your GDP, buy it from us, but also keep yourself in power by putting some in UK military industrial complex, some in Germany, and some in France. And so J.D. Vance came there and gave a very condescending speech. The Americans love it because they look like, hey, we're telling the truth. This is time of change. And the Europeans get offended. It drives everyone in that direction. And what did he do in order to do that? Well, he did lectures on immigration, which is a soft spot, a spot for the people, while the governments know that they were going involved in those, very unpopular types of weaponizations that we used by having some open border policy as well. So firstly, in terms of the truth, we need to recognize that those open border policy were funded by organizations like USAID, and it was done through the National Endowment of Democracy and AIPAC funding and various other pro-Israeli funding as well, in order to create the fake war on terror so that they could, Israel could justify why it needs to protect itself by pretending that they're being killed by people that want to wipe out the Jews, and therefore you need this whole Muslim narrative, and then wars create the radicalism because there's these groups that were funded by covert regime changes and that we're led to believe that they're following the Quran when nothing they're doing is Islamic. And so therefore you have this hate that is spread, and you can pit the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims against each other, and then you can rage wars, and then you can open the borders, and you can create a narrative that these are the dangerous ones invading you, while there is actually genuine crime, because when you create wars, you end up having to pick up these refugees from countries that have been detoppled, which creates more crime. And so you focus on symptoms rather than solutions. And that open border policy was all funded through these organizations. You get the point. So, forget that they were lecturing Europe on allowing that to happen, even though it was created as part of CIA and Mossad and MI6 policies, which is what led to Sudanese immigration, Libyan immigration, Syrian immigration, Afghanistani immigration and refugees. This whole narrative that USAID was paving for as well. Forget that America and Israel created that, and he's lecturing Europe on that. But anyway, it's a good way to get the populist movement, because it's a very unpopular thing, based upon these countries that have been destroyed by the European Central Bank, and the European leaders have been so weak at recognizing it. And so I kind of think as the European leadership at the moment, a bit like Genocide Joe and Holocaust Harris, it's kind of like that type of world when things were going really, really, possible. Whereas the Trump administration has moved on and is shifting the US towards reality. But Europe is, has kind of missed the memo. And so they're still saying this and building the European military industrial complex. And so that kind of pays into my thought around that's what Putin, Trump, and MBS will want to negotiate around, having that type of region that is needed to support what America wants to maintain the regional superpower and sell more goods to Europe while they can still afford it as their economies get worse and worse and worse. But not too bad. Okay. Look, geopolitically, we are now at the time, if you follow the money, where we need to stop killing Ukrainian soldiers. We don't need to send them any more military. They haven't got the people to operate it. And nobody's got the forces that are needed in order to suddenly, magically change direction, push back, Putin, and fund the profits of the military-industrial complex. That world is over. So now we need to change our narrative. And some people are finding that very hard because they were so Stockholm syndrome into the propaganda they were fed as well. So, as I said, Europe could thrive as a regional power like America will likely be doing once it manages this transition. It could be balancing trade between BRICS and America instead of self-destructing as it currently is right now, by pushing up US weapon sales and ending up buying its gas solely from America. It will have no choice. That will be negotiated. But the current path of NATO and increasing expenditure is nothing more than a sales broker for the US war machine. And so that is what people need to recognize NATO is. And so Zelensky's here delivering the message, rallying up Europe, saying we need to protect ourselves, which, yeah, you need your own sovereignty. But it is all a negotiation about how much of the money that Europe wants to steal from Russia and America wants to steal from Russia, and how much of the land is divvied up. The European Central Bank has basically been servicing the Fed and done the Fed first strategy, not European people. Basically, if it continues down that path, it's going to be supporting both Trump and Putin, and Europe will be, there will be no make Europe great again. It will be a make America great again narrative, but Europe needs to remain strong, as I covered in the previous section. Sorry, starting to reach the end of where my voice gets really tiring, but we're going through, and I'll cover the different events as well. And remember, there is another strategy. I covered that last week, where all of these resources are powering AI. If Elon Musk can exert a regime change the leadership because they're so unpopular in Europe, then they could demand transparency from our government. And then Elon could say, well, we'll do our AI and then we can have all that data. And then you get transparency and we can retreat and have honesty in our systems as well. We'll watch how that actually works. But that's another thing that in the new world order of regional powers that will be happening. But the narrative that we got this week anyway. So Russia said that it will be basically what I think is going to be happening is Russia will be saying that we now need elections in US. We can't have the CIA proxy. We can't have the US first in Ukraine. We need to have a new election. And so that will be a part of the negotiation. The reason for that is because I don't think Russia is going to sign and formalize a peace agreement unless it knows which government it's actually signing with. It can't just have, I'll sign an agreement here, then we do a ceasefire, and then there's some whole covert regime change, and America goes back to its old ways because Israel manages to use its lobby power to resist against a two-state solution, and we have this destabilizing thing that gets back to the old model. And so in order to prevent that, Putin's not stupid. He's going to be saying, well, who's going to be the next leader of Ukraine? And so that will be part of the negotiation. Russia will be saying, here's who we think it should be. US will be saying, here's who we think it will be. UK and Europe will maybe saying who we think it should be. And whoever's got the most cards and chips will be determining that as well. And so that's the game. And so now we need to look at what is it that we're actually happened this week, now that we know that the European Union got played. Well, so there was a meeting between all of the European leaders. They met at the Munich. The German vice chancellor came out this week, Habeck, and he said the Trump administration has launched an attack on Western values. So they still think that that this is an attack on Western values and that they're beacons of democracy. And so they're still playing into that narrative. So we can see, they're playing that game. Why? Because they want the $350 million to go majorly into the German military industrial complex as they increase that 5% NATO and America retreats. What did the UK Prime Minister do? Well, Starmer, he came out and said that he is ready to send troops to Ukraine to enforce a peace deal with Russia. Okay, so we've got Germany defending Western values, and we've got UK saying we'll send our troops. Just by the way, do the numbers. There are millions of troops, one of the largest forces in Russia, despite the fact at the end of this they've lost people, absolutely, but UK only has about 19,000 troops. That doesn't change a damn thing. But it plays with the narrative, right, of Trump saying we don't want our troops there. So Europe, you put your troops there. Again, destabilize the region, put them in a bit of conflict, economically harm them, while America and Russia become the powers and MBS decides what that looks like in line to the BRICS side as well. So don't listen to what they say. This is exactly what I think following the money is consistent with that belief. By the way, British soldiers, they should not be sacrificed by the CIA proxy war. We need to make sure more people understand this content so we don't allow any of these things to actually happen. But, as the British people, if they want a war with Russia, I'm sure they don't. But the narrative could be controlled in order to make people think they're standing up for democracy. They're fighting for their country. They're not fighting for the profits of the military industrial complex that's creating wealth inequality and creating inflation and destroying the middle class in the UK. Starmer won't tell you that because he said this is a Britain first. And we unequivocally support Ukraine no matter what, because it's all part of exactly how to achieve this mission anyway. It's an absolute failure in leadership. You can see it all around. It's horrible to see. And so we started to see commentary from the Russian foreign minister now that is engaging in talks with MBS and Trump and the leadership as well. So Sergei Lavrov said that it has held talks with the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and it did it in Saudi Arabia. And so they had all the posturing to set up for the New World Order 2025 meeting when Trump will actually be directly meeting with Putin. They were testing the water of how that goes and what a meeting on Saudi Arabia looks like. Lavrov came out and said that if Europe intends to continue the war in Ukraine while they're fighting rather than pushing for peace, then why should they be invited to the negotiation table? That falls in line with the narrative that I painted following the macro and Bitcoin stuff. Russia then, after the meeting, then confirmed that no Ukrainian and no European officials are present at the meeting that happened in Saudi Arabia for the negotiations with the United States, held in Saudi Arabia, between Russia and the United States. You get the follow the money. Lavrov then came out after the meeting and said negotiations with the United States were very productive and will continue moving forward to end the conflict in Ukraine. So we're now talking about ending it. But remember, they're going to put all the chips on the table and determine the future of that as well. Then we got in a massive tit for tat this week where everybody was watching a episode, who needs Hollywood anymore when you can watch the real world? And this is exactly what we're starting to see. United States basically came out and said that it could lift sanction on Russia if the war in Ukraine is resolved. So they're now starting to push out those carrots and those sticks leading towards the meeting. What happened? Europe said, this is an abomination. This is a violation. This is the future of democracy, everything we've been told over the last 3 years. And Europe went back and said, well, we'll go meet with Zelensky and we'll have our own meeting. And America's not invited. We'll start. How can we enforce that? Well, that 350 billion, remember, a chunk of that is in European banks. And we want that to rebuild Ukraine. And we want to get those contracts. We want to we don't want BlackRock doing it. We want the UK, the France, and Germany to get those rebuilding contracts and those military contracts and that 5% of NATO to become a sales force for our own military industrial complex. And if we've got any negotiating power, we want to use that in order to get some Ukrainian land. And we want to get the rare earth that US want. So you see why Europe is not invited to the table. The US, they want the money. They want the money that they've confiscated to be used in order to negotiate the rare earths, negotiate, what land deals and what rebuild deals. And they also will use the land that Russia was meant to get. And the oil that Russia is meant to be delivering, and the gas that they agree, and the routes that are allowed to be turned on, the rare earths that are going to be discussed. Basically, all of those details are going to be discussed at the 2025 New World Order meeting. And so what came out? What narrative do we get? Well, Zelensky comes out and pushes back and pushes for Europe and says, Europe, why don't you give us some more money? We can win this war. We can do this. All you need to do is send more. And why don't you push out some troops? And we need alliance without America. And you can provide the support instead. And so now we enter into the tit for tat between Zelensky and Trump. Now, Trump tells 70% of the truth, doesn't reveal that it's a CIA operation, the coup and all that stuff, but does reveal a bit of the truth to rally America and recognize, damn, this whole thing was a scam as part of, the retreat as well. So that America first can become a retreat without looking like American weakness and losing the war. And so Trump called out Zelensky and called him a dictator and said that only 4% of support, would get behind Zelensky right now. And he was meant to have an election. And that election didn't happen. So the same narrative, suddenly you change it. Does this not remind you of, remember when we were told that there was a death counter and we all need to inject ourselves? And then suddenly Putin, Hitler comes along and then we all need to focus on Ukraine. And now suddenly we now need to focus on Zelensky as a dictator and he had no democracy and that only 4%. So look, see the narratives. And then Europe need to provide the counter narrative of, no, we are supporting democracy. And then you get the whole thing of Trump's a dictator and Trump is removing democracy. And so you get all the theatrics that play in line with where we're headed. Zelensky then came up and said, US President Trump is spreading Russian disinformation by claiming that Zelensky's approval is only 4%. So they're stuck in the old narrative. 70% of the truth is coming on the American side, and the 30% is being hidden because that's the negotiation chips in order to set the New World Order. United States then came out and said, we're halting all weapon sales to Ukraine. No more. That then sets the turf war for the negotiations that are coming up. Trump stated that started pushing out the narrative of why is half the money of the military industrial complex gone? We pushed out 350 billion. Europe pushed out 100 billion. Why has half of it disappeared? Well, it went to US contractors to prop up the euro dollar, and Zelensky bribes and the network that was needed to maintain the corruption and all of the money from US aid in order to control the narrative to make everyone think that they were defending democracy by this covert operation. Elon Musk is weaponized in order to push out Doge. And said that it will audit all of US money that is sent to Ukraine. So we get the extinction model where it reveals the truth. We will find all the corruption. That becomes an essential part of blaming the Democrats so that Republicans get in next. And it gets the model of dismantling the euro dollar, but making sure that Europe has enough to be, negotiating with Russia and BRICS, so that Trump has some of the power in the New World Order. Trump has some of the power and Putin has some of the power as well. And US, of course, it wants the rare earth minerals from the land, which BlackRock has collateralized. And America has the companies own America. And so, of course, BlackRock will get what it wants and the technocracy will get what it wants because they are stronger than the government based upon the sheer monetary power of the global financiers as well. And Trump will be pushing for what America wants and negotiating his portfolio for his future family as well. Bessent came out as well. He actually went to Kiev and again, pushing the same thing. Trump came out after the visit to Kiev of Bessent. And Trump said that he was basically Bessent was treated very badly by Zelensky. And he declined the rare earth mineral deal that was being negotiated between America and Ukraine. And then Zelensky basically declined a deal that was due for renewal and said that unless it includes a security deal and a guarantee by US, then we won't have it. So that deal is over, and it just becomes a negotiation chip between MBS, Putin, and Trump when they have the New World Order meeting as well. US-Russia peace plans basically started to state that would require Ukraine to hold a new election. So this is Zelensky disappears with all of his corrupt money. He gets asylum wherever he goes. We have an election. The Ukrainian people decide which of the UK plant, the US plant, or the Russian plant they want in charge. And there will be funding and political interference into that. But it's the final one to dismantle the euro dollar, retreat. And then we need to just take care of the petrodollar, which means two-state solution and the various other things. And we look at the other side of the petrodollar. And so Zelensky will end up, basically my prediction based upon following the money, he'll just flee into asylum eventually. Based upon what will be revealed by the Doge audit that will expose all the corruption. And then that will create anger from all of the Ukrainian people and anger from the American people and anger from the Europeans so that can be weaponized in the negotiation, which takes us into a tariff war between EU and America afterwards, which will probably end in reciprocals if they want to have the region that they want afterwards. But that's probably where it's going to go based upon that. But it gives them their chips that they need as they go onto the table and basically tell Europe how it's actually going to be done. UK and France, they're visiting Trump next week. So they'll be visiting the White House. And we will cover that next week, what actually comes from there. Russia came out and said it started to put a bone out there. It could conceive that the $350 billion being used or being sanctioned right now could be used to rebuild Ukraine if it gets what it wants, and it will be a lot larger negotiation chips along the lines of what I said and I thought would happen in the macro section. If you just watch this video on its own, you can go to the macro section to get those details, the financial details. And that's everything that's happening on that front. So that is the latest in the euro dollar and the retreat. Now let's go over to the petrodollar and how that one's going. And that's the other side, and then we can close up the geopolitical section. Right. So if you remember where we were last week when we did Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 70, Trump was given the narrative that he is going to take over Gaza. And I said, don't listen. That's World War. You know, that's not the strategy anymore. That's not the dismantling of the petrodollar. That's Israel getting what they want, where American troops will be on the ground and there'll be false flag operations. And then America will be driven into war with Iran, and you'll get false flags all across America that will make you justify. And you could even get the worst of the worst, which would be the execution of the 2 to 3 attempts at the assassination of Trump. And then Vance comes in and executes the vision of what, you know, he's paid to do. You know, it could get the worst typical Mossad strategies that we've seen, like JFK. You know, but is there a way of avoiding that is kind of where we're asking as well. So what did he need to do? So Trump needed to put the narrative, we're going to take over Gaza, it's ours. There will be forced displacement, Egypt, Jordan, you're taking them. Knowing that would create a revolution, and that's the Israel strategy, create a revolution against the leader, install new, and then America has to deploy troops, and then that will be used for Iran. So that's the strategy they want. But Trump needs to show allegiance with his backers. Basically, his narrative was that if all hostages are not returned last weekend, then the floodgates of hell will be opened and Israel can do whatever they want as well. As predicted last week, that did not happen. And that is showing that there is actually some power towards a two-state solution, and the people are actually having some power here because all the dictators are trying to prevent a revolution. That's what makes me think that as well, because the floodgates of hell did not open. Israel needed to capitulate. It started letting some aid in that it didn't let. It stopped again, but it started letting some aid in. And then Trump walked back on his comments. He demanded full release of all of the hostages, no drip or drab or anything. Israel went ahead with the hostage swap as well. They did that. They capitulated, even though they said they would stop. That makes me believe that that was US pressure saying you have to do it. Hamas went and released 3 hostages from Gaza. That all happened last week as well, including one of the American sisters. That's a gesture towards America. And Trump came out and said a comment. So remember, he was spreading the Israeli propaganda before that the condition of those hostages is terrible, even though they came out in good condition. This time he said, oh, it looks like we got an American hostage back, and it seems like they came out in good condition. And so that is Trump, I believe, having a slap at Netanyahu, because Trump needs to perpetuate the Israel narrative that they were sexual assault, they were raped, they were all these things that happened to them. And Trump admitted, no, they look in good shape. And so it's not doing what it did last week, where it did the Israeli narrative. That implies to me that there is a struggle personally between what Israel wants and what America wants, but there's a front. That's what I'm reading between that when you follow the money. Last weekend, 369 Palestinian hostages were released as well. Many, I mean, if you want to talk about every confession, every accusation being a confession, these people were tortured. These people were in horrific condition. Mental. When you see the videos, you don't get it on the media, the traditional media. But if you watch any of the footage of these Palestinian hostages coming out of the Israeli side, they are really in bad condition. It's really horrible to watch. But phase one has been going successful so far. Everything seems to be moving forward towards the very difficult one, which is phase two. That's the one where we get the volatility as well. But there's been lots of volatility. So as predicted on last week's podcast, Trump capitulated in order to save face. And so his statement changed suddenly. He said he is confirming that they are in good shape, as I said as well, which was a clear dig at Netanyahu, but also that things, it's up to Israel what they want to do. This is what I would do. Okay. And then Israel let in some aid, and so we got a reversal of the policy. So this is moving forward. This is, showing that Israel's in charge, but I think the resistance has worked so far. In the Western world, it's painted with the narrative there. In the rest of the world, this is humiliation for Israel in front of their people, because he's basically being shown that Netanyahu wants war and Hamas is complying, and they're coming out in good shape. And so it just doesn't align with the narrative. And in Israel, they got all the protesters that want all of their hostages returned. And so Hamas came out and did a couple of 1-2 punches as well. So firstly, phase two is the difficult phase. So I don't want to get too hopeful, because this is where Israel has all the leverage. In phase one, Trump had the leverage, and the resistance had the leverage. And so we got to, through phase one. Now, phase two is where you have the negotiated solution. This is absolutely what Israel does not want. They do not want the return of the hostages and a solution. That is completely against the war goal of the Greater Israel Project, and that is an admission of defeat. And that means Trump gets what he wants, but Israel doesn't get what they want. Trump wants to be remembered as the engineer of world peace. And if he pulls this off, he deserves it as well. So I believe that Hamas could be completely humiliated in phase two, because Israel has some of the power here. And so this is the phase where we need to watch very, very carefully. So Hamas filed a few more 1-2 punches. Hamas said that as long as there is no alternative, they will continue to manage Gaza. Now, what that means is that they are open to a handover of leadership to either the Palestinian Authority or whatever is determined in this construct of the New World Order, which is why Jeffrey Epstein was weaponized against Clinton last time, because Arafat entered into a peace negotiation, two-state solution, and then that was led with assassinations by Israel's leadership on their own leadership, and a replacement with Netanyahu, and also Clinton being blackmailed to sabotage the Oslo Accords using Jeffrey Epstein and all the blackmail operation. And so this is, where essentially Hamas are saying we are open to handing over leadership if a genuine solution can be found. So, they're saying that. Now comes the hard part, and that is the solution. So while the Israel government is pushing for war, and Netanyahu is dependent upon it, because the coalition government are saying, if you don't return to war, then they're leaving, and then Netanyahu needs to be trialed for crimes against humanity and all the corruption that was happening, that was creating all of the protests in Israel prior to October the 7th. That comes back around, which is what he needs to prevent. And then they investigate October the 7th and realize that he allowed it to happen. And all the Atrocity Inc. Documentary, if you haven't watched it, it's on my blog. Go to my blog, simondixon.com, put in Atrocity Inc. And it shows how October the 7th was completely fabricated. There were deaths, but all the rest was who said all the lies, how it got to Biden, how Netanyahu did it, all that stuff. Details all covered in there. If you want to see how the Proof of Weapons media network works. Now, Trump has said his solution is ethnic cleansing. He wants to bribe Jordan, give him some US aid, but you take it, and bribed Egypt, saying you take it, but Egypt and Jordan say we won't be able to do it without a revolution. And so Israel wants to push for a revolution because that's how they get American troops, and that's how they get Occupy Gaza, and that's how they get go to war with Iran, and that's how they get the potential of World War III, where Israel comes out as the global hegemon power. Now, Trump, the peace path, as I covered out earlier, is the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation. And so they're meeting to say what the solution is. And GCC is meeting with Egypt, with Jordan. They had their meeting, just the GCC, and they were hearing the Egypt's plan. And so Egypt has presented their plan, and now they're going to present it to the greater region. No ethnic cleansing. I believe it will be a two-state solution, and it will be a rebuild of Gaza funded by the GCC. And depending on how the negotiations go with MBS, it will be probably the Palestinian Authority in charge of retreat of Hamas in the leadership, and ending the funding of Israel, a security deal, and the GCC being the new superpower of the region, a retreat of the CIA covert regime changes, normalization with Iran into the GCC, and an environment of dismantling the petrodollar. So half of it goes to BRICS and half of it goes to America, and MBS can be in the center of that I covered in the other section. And so next week, or in the next couple, next week, I think it's the 4th of March, there will be a wider meeting, and I think this will include, the Palestinian Authority, probably the US at this time, probably Hamas will be negotiating there as well. And whatever the actual path forward is going to be, as long as America does not get pushed into occupying and escalating into a regime change with Iran. Egypt, I think their plan is to invest about, through the GCC, $20 to $50 billion in redevelopment phases. Remember, Egypt is bribed by America through US aid. They receive an amount of money to maintain the illegal occupation. And Israel is also bribed by America in order to maintain carnage in the industry and maintain the illegal occupation. And then Israel sends a lot of that money back in order to engage in blackmail, AIPAC funding, buying Congress, in order to have the political negotiations. And then the global financing networks is how they have a global vision. And that's why you had things like Israel stealing America's nuclear refining and some of the technology, and then sharing it with China because they kind of sit in the middle. And you had all of the things in the false flag operations where they killed Americans in USS Liberty to try and draw America out into a nuclear war with Egypt so that they could blame it on Egypt, and 9/11, all of the things, the clean break plan, all of the things we covered in previous episodes. But the GCC met today, and then the next meeting is on the 4th of March, and that will be a summit in Cairo in Egypt with about 20 of the Arab leaders. And that is when we're going to find out what the solution is. Basically it's an alternative to the Trump plan. And that's why Trump put an outrageous plan so that they could come back with Egypt's plan, which would be a reasonable alternative, but Israel is going to hate it. And so Israeli ambassador came out and accused Egypt, just as the plan was coming out, of violating the David Accords peace agreement that they signed many decades ago. And then suddenly the internet starts filling with flooded with footage of Egypt pulling up troops and military equipment and the army being deployed, and all of the Israeli agents on X coming out saying Egypt's violating the peace agreement. They're getting ready for war, just as Egypt sent their plan through. And so they're spreading that message to make it look like Egypt is about to go to war and that they're surrounded by enemies and that they're everyone wants to kill the Jewish people. And so therefore, America, you must go with this plan because the plan of the GCC is outrageous. You can't stop sending Israel money. You can't normalize between us and the region. You can't allow for a two-state solution. You can't allow for Palestinian self-determination. You've had our back for all of these decades, making sure that there's no peace. You get the point. So Israel is pushing harder and harder at that. You're getting all of these videos coming out, the same USAID funded stuff, the same thing we saw on October the 7th to make you feel there's 40 beheaded babies. And what do they do in the background? Well, this week, while we're meant to be in peace, this is meant to be ceasefire, Israel has expelled 40,000 Palestinians by demolishing houses in the West Bank. This is the West Bank that is in control by the Palestinian Authority, a US plant, with no Hamas. And so they're continuing to bulldoze their house, doing terrorism within the West Bank. And now they've even forgot about they don't even need to say human shields. They don't even need to create any false narrative. They're just doing it with impunity right now. They also decided to breach the ceasefire group to withdraw from Lebanon, the occupied territory. Remember, they were meant to withdraw on February the 18th after saying that they needed an extension. And so they just ignored that now. So they've got a full-time illegal occupation in Lebanon. They continue to occupy Syria. Syria has still the sanctions in place. America is still funding the Kurdish Marxist communists to occupy the oil to make sure that Syria doesn't have the power, while Turkey implanted it and funded the rebellion groups. We're getting the Syrian resistance. We don't know what the future of the region there is. Hopefully those sanctions can be lifted as part of this. And there can be an actual, election, democracy, whatever, but a real one this time, because it's run by an actual normalization, real agreement, rather than Israel being funded by US to sabotage everything. At the same time, Israel within Gaza, which is meant to be a ceasefire, they killed 3 Palestinian police officers, despite the peace offer agreement. They also, after bringing in the mobile homes, after Hamas canceled the agreement and then reinstated it, they stopped it again. So there's no mobile homes and humanitarian aid. There's no more tents coming in. They stopped them all coming in. Israel also assassinated a commander in Lebanon, a Hamas commander. So they continued that, even though they're meant to be in ceasefire. They're trying to get Hamas back into war, basically. They are doing everything they can to sabotage this, because phase 2 is that you have to negotiate peace and you have to retreat and you have to go into a 2-state solution and you have to do what is decided between MBS, Putin, and Trump at the upcoming meeting in Saudi Arabia. So in order to facilitate that, Marco Rubio went to Israel, representing America, doubled down on US owning Gaza. So that's pushing the outrageous rhetoric that will never work. Netanyahu came out and said that the hostages are not returned. If they're not returned, the gates of hell will open. He's trying to get America to open the gates of hell. He said he wants to finish the job with Iran. So he's still pushing. We must regime change Iran. We must get rid of Iran. We must go to war with Iran. Hamas said that they will continue to resist if America occupies. And at the same time, Hamas then said the next phase of the negotiation, let's push this forward, because Israel is getting so aggressive towards war. They said we will do the agreement. Way back in 2023, a father that was one of the hostages, an Israeli father hostage, released a video stating, now you could say it was under duress, accept that argument, but he stated that my children were killed and my wife was killed by Israeli bombardments, and he was kept as a hostage, and he was the one that was going to be released. And so as part of the agreement, even though the father said that this was done as a result of Israeli bombardment rather than Hamas assassinating and killing children, They agreed this week, and it happened on Thursday, to release the 4 dead, 2 children, 1 wife, and return those bodies. And so they were in. It's very sad. You got to remember what actually happened. Remember, the war chief got admitted that Hannibal Directive was initiated on October the 7th. And so as all hell was breaking loose on October the 7th, Hamas was killing people. Israel was firing people down with Apache helicopters and tanks. And so, they ended up with 2 children as part of the hostage taking in order to have the hostage swap. It's absolutely tragic. I completely condemn that. It's really, really sad that 2 Israeli children have got caught up in this. But according to everything, these are the only 2. There wasn't the mass killing of children that was pushed out. These are the only 2. There was one there was one we know about in the actual reports. There was one that was killed on October the 7th, and there were 2 that were taken as hostages. And then in November 2023, the father confirmed that Israel had bombarded the 2 hostages. So they agreed this week that they would release the 4 bodies and return them to their family. Incredibly sad. But it was also used to push out massive Israeli weaponization to get this back to war as well. Remember, there's no benefit in a hostage that is treated badly that is killed, because this is about a hostage swap. That's the whole purpose of the mission, to lead to a 2-state solution. If they are treated badly or they're murdered, you're losing what they're trying to negotiate with. And so why would it even make sense? But of course, Israel's going to come out and say they murdered them on purpose. They're celebrating, because at every hostage swap, they have this ceremony. And then they came out and said that, Hamas love killing children. They want to kill Jews. So they were celebrating and dancing over releasing these, which was part of the agreement. And a big propaganda campaign is put out there, releasing, even though the videos are still there, of the father admitting that this happened because of Israeli bombardments way back in the beginning as well. So anyway, they said they're going to do a forensic investigation to determine the cause of what happened. And you can bet your bottom dollar they'll say all sorts of crazy stuff to try and draw America into war and pull on exactly what they did on October the 7th. And that brings us to the next phase. So the next phase, anyway, tomorrow over the weekend, we'll see how it goes. They decided, Hamas came out and said, rather than doing 3 soldiers in to try and progress this into phase 2 and to get a solution without going back to war, they decided to speed it up. So they said they're going to release 6 Israeli hostages this weekend. That happens tomorrow. We'll cover what happened next week. And that was 3 more than previously planned, 1 week ahead of schedule. So that moves everything 1 week ahead of schedule. And Hamas came out with a 1-2 punch and basically said, we'll offer what we offered 3 days after October the 7th, when this could have been ended. We'll offer to release all of the hostages if we can get to a genuine 2-state solution right now. And so phase 2, they have decided that it can fast track. I believe that America's interest is to push that forward so Trump can say, I solved the world. But Israel doesn't want to allow that to happen. And the protesters in Israel know now that there is a 100% offer to release all hostages right now. And Israel's going to turn it down because they're trying to escalate towards war, which is why it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so what happened today? So firstly, you had the video saying that Hamas is celebrating murdering children that they killed, and then they celebrate killing Jews and all that type of stuff. And suddenly today, not at 9 a.m. So if you were trying to do a bus bombing and kill people, then you would have done it at 9 a.m. when everyone's going to work. But at 9 p.m. when it's really quiet, we had 3 buses within Tel Aviv blown up which is minimizing. There was no civilian casualties as a result, and everything was videoed. And they said that there was Hamas bombs in there, and they had a label on there saying this is revenge for, Yahya Sinwan and the others' leadership as well. And basically they said this is Hamas, that they're now blowing up bombs, false flag within Tel Aviv. And at the same time, they're celebrating the death of babies. How can you enter into a two-state solution with these thugs, these evils, these baby killers? And so suddenly 3 empty buses exploded in South Tel Aviv, and without any casualties. This comes from Netanyahu, released the propaganda. Just to remind you, International Criminal Court, arrest warrant for war crimes. He is now accusing, basically this is going to be everything he needs in order to get way more aggressive in the West Bank, kill more Palestinians, blow up more homes, do more aerial bombardments, and basically reverse everything that is agreed in the peace agreements, so that it can push forward, because Trump and the administration may be serious about their desire. And so all of the Israeli lobbies, all of it, the false flags, everything is being weaponized to make sure that this doesn't get to peace. We don't get to phase 2, and there is no two-state solution. Just remember, this is the free pass that Netanyahu wants when he does these false flags. And again, I just follow the money and come up with a conclusion. You can tell me in the comments what you think is happening here. But this is everything they need to expel more Palestinians and escalate the war and control the narrative. So anyway, my message to you in the West, in Europe, don't be fooled by the ECB Fed First policy. Make sure you align your interest with those that are actually going to support your people, rather than the psyop that happened because you got fooled into a proxy war with America. America, don't be fooled by Israel into going to war with Iran. It will be an escalation to World War III. It's not America first, and it will bankrupt everything and continue the proof of weapons network, which you have done great work in retreating. And Trump won't get his ability to say, I created world peace. And anyway, there is going to be a decision made between MBS, between Putin and Trump, and Zelensky doesn't get a seat at the table. Europe doesn't get a seat at the table. Netanyahu doesn't get a seat at the table, because they all have an agenda that's going to take this in a different direction. The new world order is being negotiated in the 2025 meeting, and Europe is being told what it will be doing, and Israel is not going to like it any way, shape, or form. But as long as you Americans don't get fooled into war with Iran and into that narrative, and you focus on America first, you focus on that, then you don't need to be fooled into killing lots more people in the Middle East in the name of Israel's fake war on terror, based upon false flag operations, lies and deceit, and everything that has been revealed to you. And I'll keep revealing on my X account for as long as I can as well. Remember, without truth, there can be no peace. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. I want to make sure that you're on the right side of this change. If you enjoyed this content, please do share it with your loved ones. We'll break it up to 3. You can have the long form content. Scan the QR code. You can watch it in you can listen to it on your podcast while you're driving. I know this is long content, but I hope you understand that I'm trying to condense everything, follow the money, and make sure that you are one step ahead. Protect yourself with Bitcoin, own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, learn self-custody. Later this year, I'll be doing the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program. I'll be revealing my portfolio of what I did when I bought every month and how I put together a portfolio from the last 4 years since that video. That will be coming out later this year. Lots of things to look forward to. Let's do it with peace, love, unity. I can see the path. I hope we don't get diverted, but we can't rely on politicians and centralization. So build decentralization, get involved in that. We're transitioning to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Everyone needs to know what it means for them so that we can transition with peace. I'll see you next week.